Tell me in the comments from where you are watching and what is the time there, and support me by subscribing the channel. There is a place on Earth where civilization, as we know it, first took form, not in legend, but in clay, water, and time. This land, known to the ancient world as Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, lies cradled between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Today, it is buried beneath the dust of Iraq, Kuwait, and parts of Syria. But over 5,000 years ago, it was a vibrant, pulsing plain where human society took its first deliberate shape. Here, the foundations of urban life, written language, institutional religion, and centralized power were all laid. This was not just a place of invention. It was the beginning of human history itself. The rivers were both promise and peril. Each spring, the snow melt from distant mountains flooded the Mesopotamian plain. These floods deposited rich silt, turning arid soil into fertile farmland. But they were unpredictable, sometimes generous, sometimes violent. To live in Mesopotamia was to learn to adapt, to observe the seasons, to measure water, to record patterns, to respond with ingenuity. The people who settled here did not merely survive the chaos of nature, they organized it. They built canals, levees, dikes, and reservoirs. They did not wait for the flood. They redirected it. This was humanity's first great act of environmental engineering. Such coordination required cooperation on a new scale. It demanded planners, laborers, and overseers. And it required surplus food, enough not just to eat, but to store, to distribute, and to support those who no longer worked the land directly. As agricultural production intensified, villages grew into towns, and towns into cities. By the late 4th millennium BCE, a network of city-states had risen across southern Mesopotamia, the region known as Sumer. These were among the first true cities on Earth. Each city-state, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Nippur, Eridu, was an independent, political entity, with its own ruler, its own patron god, and its own internal organization. Yet they were bound together by a shared language, a common pantheon, and a profound cultural identity. Life in these cities revolved around two centers of power, the temple and the palace. The temple, or ziggurat, towered above the mud brick streets, a mountain of man-made stone, connecting heaven and earth. It was the dwelling of the gods, the storehouse of grain, and the administrative heart of the city. The priests who served there held immense authority, both spiritual and material. In these temples, rituals were performed, daily offerings to gods like Anu, Enlil, Inanna, and Enki, deities who embodied forces of nature, wisdom, fertility, and kingship. The gods were not abstract ideals. They were living presences, demanding attention, appeasement, and obedience. And through the priests, they spoke. Religion in Sumer was not a matter of private belief. It was a total worldview, embedded in politics, law, and economics. The line between divine order and civic order did not exist. To break a law was to violate the sacred. To question authority was to insult the heavens. Alongside the temple, the palace emerged a newer, more secular power center. The Lugal, or king, began as a war leader, chosen to defend the city during crisis. But over time, this temporary office hardened into hereditary kingship. Kings ruled not only by strength, but by divine sanction. Many claimed to be chosen by the gods, some even claimed descent from them. This dual authority, temple and palace, priest and king, became the defining political structure of Mesopotamian life. And so, in the cradle of civilization, power was born, not the raw strength of the hunter or the elder's quiet influence, but institutional power, centralized, legitimized, systematized. This was the beginning of rule, of hierarchy, not as momentary agreement, but as lasting structure. But Sumer was not merely about governance. It was about the organization of information. The same demands that pushed the Mesopotamians to build canals and store grain also drove them to record. At first, this was simple tallying, clay tokens used to track livestock, grain, and trade. But around 3200 BCE, something unprecedented happened. These tokens evolved into symbols, markings pressed into soft clay with a reed stylus. These symbols became standardized. They formed sequences. They recorded events. And writing was born. This early script, cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped, is the first known system of writing in human history. It began as accounting, but it quickly expanded to document laws, hymns, treaties, royal proclamations, and even literature. In writing, humanity gained a new power, the power to fix memory, to transmit ideas across generations, to preserve authority beyond death. Cuneiform turned the fleeting into the permanent. It was the beginning of history, because now we had a record. The emergence of writing marks the final threshold into civilization. It changed how humans thought, how they governed, how they saw themselves. It made contracts possible. It stabilized trade. It preserved law, and it allowed the voices of rulers, priests, and poets to speak across the ages. This is why we call Mesopotamia the cradle of civilization. Not because it was perfect, far from it. These cities were rife with inequality, war, and fragility, but because in Mesopotamia, for the first time, the full apparatus of civilization emerged: cities, kings, temples, bureaucracy, technology, writing, religion, art, and law. It was a beginning, imperfect, powerful, and irreversible, and it all began between two rivers. If Mesopotamia was the cradle of civilization, then Uruk was its first heartbeat, the place where the pulse of urban life began to quicken, expand, and define what it meant to be human in a world of walls, temples, and rule. Long before Babylon and Assyria rose to glory, before the pyramids of Egypt cast their shadows, Uruk flourished. By 3000 BCE, it was the largest and most complex urban center the world had ever known, a sprawling city of tens of thousands of people, fed by the waters of the Euphrates and sustained by an elaborate web of agriculture, labor, belief, and bureaucracy. This was not a village grown large. Uruk was a new invention, a fully formed city. Here, the very concept of urbanism took root. Streets were laid out, some narrow and winding, others ceremonial and broad. Houses clustered by neighborhood, often grouped by craft or kinship. Markets buzzed with activity. Farmers selling surplus grain, potters trading jars, shepherds bringing wool, fishmongers with baskets of river catch. This was not subsistence. This was specialization. Most people in Uruk no longer grew their own food. They worked for others, traded goods or labor for grain and beer, and relied on systems of distribution. In this way, the city created its own economy, interdependent, layered, and regulated. Towering over this teeming life was the White Temple, dedicated to Anu, the sky god, an early ziggurat built atop a high platform of sun-baked brick. It could be seen from every corner of the city, a visual anchor of both religion and power. The temple was more than a place of worship. It was a treasury, a granary, an administrative center, and a political stage. Priests managed vast estates, oversaw the collection of offerings and taxes, regulated trade, and kept ritual calendars. From here, celestial order was brought down to earth, encoded in festivals, sacrifices, and ceremonies that marked the rhythm of urban life. Below the temple, in the bustling layers of the city, writing was born. Uruk was the crucible of cuneiform, the place where abstract thought met administrative necessity. Early tablets, pressed with reed styluses into damp clay, were used to track rations, labor assignments, property, and trade. These records were not just tools, they were transformations. The scribe became a new kind of authority, literate, trusted, and essential. Writing was first a tool of the elite, the priesthood and bureaucracy, but its effects rippled outward. It enabled law. It preserved ritual. It recorded myth. It made memory durable. As Uruk expanded, so did its complexity. Canals fed fields and supported transport. Brick kilns operated year-round. Workshops produced textiles, leather goods, metal tools, and religious objects. Labor was divided not only by skill but also by class. While some lived in homes with private courtyards and wells, others dwelled in crowded quarters with shared amenities. Slavery existed, prisoners of war or debtors bound to labor, and their toil was essential to the city's wealth. Hierarchies solidified. Status became visible in housing, burial, clothing, and access to temple functions. Yet, Uruk was not only an engine of labor and worship, it was a center of culture, identity, and myth. It is here that one of the oldest known epics in human history would later take shape, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king of Uruk, embodies the duality of the city, its ambition and its arrogance, its glory and its tragedy. In legend, he builds the city walls to protect his people and assert dominance. In his quest for immortality, he reflects the deepest anxieties of a civilization that had conquered nature but not death. Through this tale, the people of Uruk told their own story of power, of loss, of the human yearning to outlast time. The city, in many ways, was a mirror of its citizens' fears and hopes. It offered security against famine, against enemies, against the wilderness beyond the walls. But it also demanded submission to laws, to rituals, to hierarchies. It offered opportunity, but also imposed inequality. In the city, life could flourish with unprecedented richness, or be crushed under the weight of labor and rule. The city was not just a place, it was a force, a way of life. Uruk's influence spread far beyond its own borders. Through trade and conquest, its models of architecture, writing, religious iconography, and administrative systems diffused across Mesopotamia and into surrounding regions. Other cities imitated its structures, borrowed its gods, and adapted its language. Uruk set a precedent, what it meant to be urban, to be organized, to be civilized. In its bricks and scribes, in its gods and kings, the city became an idea as much as a place. But even Uruk, mighty as it was, could not last forever. Its power waned by the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, challenged by rival cities and shifting trade routes. Yet it was never truly forgotten. Its myths endured, its ruins were revered, and its innovations became embedded in the very DNA of civilization. To walk through Uruk, even in memory, is to walk through the threshold of humanity's second birth. The first was in the wild, in firelight and bone. The second was here, among bricks and ledgers, where we chose structure over instinct, order over chaos, and legacy over impermanence. At the center of every Sumerian city stood not the palace, nor the market, but the temple, rising above the mud-brick homes and bustling streets like a mountain born of man's devotion. The ziggurat symbolized the axis between heaven and earth. To the Sumerians, these monumental structures were not mere buildings, they were cosmic touchstones. The temple was the city's beating heart, a place where the divine and mortal worlds met, where order was sustained not by law alone, but by ritual, reverence, and sacrifice. The spiritual life of the Sumerians permeated every facet of their existence. They did not view the gods as distant, abstract deities, but as immediate, capricious forces embedded in the fabric of life, demanding, rewarding, and punishing. Every aspect of nature, every success or calamity, was understood as the will of divine beings. The rivers flooded because Enlil was angry. A successful harvest meant the goddess Ninhursag had been appeased. Sickness was a curse from a displeased god, fertility a gift. Life was not random, it was a dialogue with the divine. Each city was dedicated to a patron god or goddess, who was believed to reside physically within the temple's sacred precinct. In Uruk, it was Inanna, the powerful goddess of love, war, and fertility. In Nippur, Enlil ruled, the chief of the pantheon. In Eridu Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water, reigned. These divine patrons were not symbols, they were sovereigns in their own right, and their temples were the most important institutions in city life. The temple complex was vast, not just a shrine, but a complete institution. It included storerooms, workshops, kitchens, living quarters for priests, scribes, and temple workers. The temple owned land, employed laborers, collected tribute, and managed distribution of surplus. In many cases, it functioned as both church and state, a bureaucracy wrapped in sanctity. Through the temple, the will of the gods was interpreted, and through ritual, that will was enacted. Rituals in Sumer were precise, frequent, and elaborate. Every day, priests would wash the god's statue, anoint it with oil, dress it in fine garments, and offer meals. These offerings of bread, baya, dates, and meat were consumed symbolically by the god and practically by the temple staff. Special festivals aligned with agricultural cycles, lunar phases, or mythic anniversaries brought the entire city into ceremony. Music, dance, incense, processions, all were essential components of maintaining cosmic balance. Sacred myths, too, formed the backbone of Sumerian identity. These stories explained the origins of the gods, the creation of humanity, and the ordering of the world. In the myth, Enuma Elish, the chaotic primordial waters are subdued by the gods, setting the stage for creation. In another tale, humans are fashioned from clay to serve the gods, freeing divine beings from the toil of labor. The message is clear. The role of humanity was not to dominate the earth, but to uphold divine order, to farm, to worship, to build, and to obey. Priests held exceptional power in this society. Their roles demanded literacy, numeracy, deep knowledge of ritual, astronomy, and law. They were mediators between gods and men, interpreters of omens, dream readers, and calendar keepers. They also acted as administrators, overseeing grain distribution, temple accounts, and land leases. In this way, spiritual authority and bureaucratic control were interwoven, indistinguishable in daily life. But religion was not only about the elite. Common people, too, participated in the sacred. They brought offerings to shrines, made personal vows, wore amulets, and prayed for healing, fertility, protection, and justice. Small household altars dotted homes. Clay figurines of protective spirits guarded thresholds. The divine was not confined to temples, it was part of every threshold crossed, every deal made, every life born or buried. This intertwining of the sacred and the mundane formed the ideological backbone of Sumerian society. Justice, kingship, even architecture, all were justified through religious belief. The king did not merely rule, he upheld divine order. Laws were not just human decisions, they were cosmic imperatives. Even the city's layout reflected sacred principles, aligning major roads with celestial patterns, placing temples at the center, and reinforcing hierarchy as a mirror of heaven. The physical form of the ziggurat itself expressed this ideology. Built in receding terraces, often painted in vivid colors, these towers mimicked the mountains, believed to be the natural dwelling places of the gods. Atop the ziggurat, a shrine housed the god's statue, attended day and night. To ascend the ziggurat was to ascend symbolically to the divine realm. It was the city's vertical axis, the spiritual spine that held the entire social world in place. Yet even as these institutions bound society together, they also reflected its contradictions. The gods were unpredictable, often violent. They favored kings, but punished hubris. Their demands could justify exploitation, forced labor, inequality, war. In this way, religion both uplifted and constrained. It gave meaning, cohesion, and continuity, but it also sanctioned hierarchy and control. Like the city itself, it was a structure of both inspiration and discipline, and still, despite these complexities, the people of Sumer believed. They sang hymns to Inanna's courage, recited lamentations for Dumuzi's death and return, invoked Enki's wisdom to bless their canals. Their world was not secular, it was enchanted, alive, ordered by forces larger than themselves. The temple was not a building, it was the axis of the universe. The Sumerians did not invent kingship, but they gave it form, vocabulary, and permanence. Before kings, there were elders, priests, tribal leaders, and temporary war chiefs. But in the Sumerian city-states of the late 4th and early 3rd millennia BCE, kingship crystallized into an enduring institution, one that claimed not only political supremacy, but divine legitimacy. In doing so, it reshaped the very nature of human governance. The Sumerians had a word for king, Lugal, literally, big man. Originally, the Lugal may have been a military leader chosen by the community in times of crisis. But over time, this role became hereditary. The Lugal transformed from protector to monarch, from guardian to god-appointed ruler. He commanded armies, presided over court cases, led rituals, received tribute, and dispensed justice. His word became law, but only because it echoed, or claimed to echo, the will of the gods. Kingship in Sumer was not secular. A king was not merely the highest-ranking human, he was the earthly extension of divine authority. He was chosen by the gods, guided by them, sometimes even descended from them in myth. His victories in war proved their favor, his failures suggested divine wrath. Thus, the king became a sacred intermediary, a vessel of divine justice, a human who walked the narrow bridge between heaven and earth to reinforce this divine mandate. Kings commissioned monuments, stelae, and inscriptions. These texts often, in the king's own voice, described how he was chosen by a god, how he rebuilt temples, protected the poor, crushed rebels, brought prosperity. But these were not just boasts. They were ideological instruments, asserting the king's indispensability and divine right. Some kings went further. They shaped not just policy, but the very legal foundation of their society, though later rulers, like Hammurabi, would become famous for their codified laws. The earliest known law collections originate from Sumer, the Code of Ur-Nammu, dating to around 2100 BCE, is the oldest known law code in human history. Inscribed in cuneiform and composed in Sumerian, it outlines laws regarding theft, murder, marriage, slavery, and social hierarchy. These laws reflect a society already deeply stratified. Penalties varied by class. A fine for a noble was different from that for a commoner or slave. Some offenses carried monetary compensation, others corporal punishment. Yet the very existence of written law marked a new era. It meant justice was not purely arbitrary. It could be referenced, taught, invoked. In writing, the law became enduring, and with its endurance came legitimacy. Law also reinforced social roles. It defined responsibilities between fathers and sons, masters and slaves, husbands and wives, creditors and debtors. Marriage contracts, property disputes, commercial agreements, all could be recorded, witnessed, and stored. The king, through his scribes and judges, became the guarantor of civil life. But power was not maintained by law alone. The king commanded armies, built fortifications, waged war. The city-states of Sumer were not isolated utopias. They were fiercely competitive, locked in cycles of alliance, betrayal, and battle. Control of water, trade routes, and territory frequently led to armed conflict. Kings led these campaigns personally. Their victories commemorated in temple offerings and victory stelae. A king's legitimacy could be bolstered by conquest or destroyed by it. To defeat a rival city was not only to expand one's domain, but to prove the favor of the gods. Victorious kings brought back spoils, prisoners, and divine statues. They sometimes destroyed temples, not just for strategic reasons, but as an act of theological domination. If a god's house could fall, perhaps his protection had waned. If a king could carry off another's idol, he claimed superiority over that city's destiny. As kings grew in power, so did their palaces vast. Complexes filled with throne rooms, courtyards, scribal offices, and administrative chambers. The palace became a second axis of power, rivaling the temple. Kings began to appoint officials, collect taxes, oversee long-distance trade, and manage corvée labor. They built monumental works, not only temples, but irrigation networks, city walls, roads, and public granaries. Through these projects, the king reshaped both the physical and social landscape. Yet kingship was never absolute. Priests retained enormous influence, particularly in cities like Nippa, where temple authority remained strong. Powerful families, landholders, and merchants could shape political outcomes. The balance between temple and palace was delicate, a dance of power, persuasion, and ritual legitimacy. There were even moments when kingship was interrupted altogether. The Sumerians preserved the tradition of the kingship list, a semi-mythical record of rulers stretching back to the time before the flood. In it, kingship is described as descending from heaven, shifting from city to city, granted and revoked by divine will. This idea that kingship is a divine gift, but not a permanent one, underscores a deep truth. Power was sacred, but also conditional. The gods could withdraw their favor, and history, even then, remembered by the end of the 3rd millennium BCE. Sumerian kingship reached new heights under rulers like Ur-Nammu of Ur and Gudea of Lagash. Their inscriptions, statues, and temples remain among the finest achievements of Mesopotamian art and architecture. But these triumphs were not merely aesthetic. They were declarations that the king was not just a man, but the architect of order, the enforcer of law, the servant, and sometimes the equal of the gods. In the Sumerian imagination, there was no clear line between ruling and worshipping, between authority and divinity. Kingship was the scaffolding upon which civilization was built, a structure of command, ritual, and vision, and through it, the early city-states of Mesopotamia endured, adapted, and prepared the way for the empires to come. All great beginnings must eventually face their end. Though the Sumerians gave humanity some of its most profound innovations, writing, kingship, law, monumental architecture, and the city itself, their dominance was not eternal. By the close of the 3rd millennium BCE, the world they had shaped began to transform. New powers emerged, foreign tongues spread, and Sumer, the originator of civilization, slowly faded into memory. Yet its spirit would live on in forms the Sumerians themselves could never have imagined. The decline of Sumer was neither sudden nor singular. It was a long and uneven process, driven by a complex mix of environmental stress, economic shifts, internal weaknesses, and external pressures. Chief among these was the strain on the land itself. For centuries, the Sumerians had relied on intensive irrigation farming, drawing water from the Tigris and Euphrates to feed their cities. But over time, the soil began to degrade. Salinization, the buildup of salt in the soil from over-irrigation, gradually reduced agricultural productivity. Fields once rich with barley and wheat began to yield less. Entire regions became exhausted, pushing populations to migrate or become dependent on imports. At the same time, the political landscape was shifting. Sumerian city-states had long vied with each other for dominance, forming alliances, breaking them, and engaging in relentless warfare. This constant conflict drained resources and destabilized the region. Rulers focused on fortifications and military campaigns, while internal governance suffered. Though kings like Yornamu and Sholgi of the 3rd dynasty of Yor managed to briefly unify much of Sumer and establish a centralized administration, their successors lacked the strength to maintain it. As centralized power weakened, the old city-states reasserted themselves, but now in a world where foreign powers were growing bolder. In the north, the Akkadians, speakers of a Semitic language, had already established themselves under Sargon the Great centuries earlier, creating the world's first empire. Though Sargon's dynasty eventually collapsed, it had changed the political fabric of Mesopotamia permanently. The Akkadian language began to replace Sumerian in daily life, commerce, and governance. Sumerian remained as a sacred and scholarly tongue, much like Latin in later Europe, but it was no longer the spoken language of the people. Waves of migration and invasion followed. The Amorites, a Semitic people from the western deserts, began to infiltrate southern Mesopotamia, settling in cities, establishing dynasties, and blending their customs with native traditions. They were not necessarily hostile, but their rise marked the end of Sumer as a distinct cultural and political force. The final blow came with the collapse of the Yor III dynasty around 2004 BCE, following invasions by the Elamites from the east and increasing Amorite pressure from the west. The great ziggurats still stood, the temples still echoed with hymns, but the language, institutions, and autonomy of the Sumerians had irrevocably changed. Yet decline is not the same as disappearance. The Sumerians' legacy is so vast, so foundational, that it is nearly invisible in its ubiquity. Their innovations were not buried with them. They were absorbed, adapted, and transmitted by those who came after. The Babylonians, who succeeded the Amorites, inherited the Sumerian religious system, mythology, and cuneiform script. They reinterpreted Sumerian deities, preserved their hymns, copied their myths. Even the great Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh is a Sumerian story reimagined in a later age. The scribes of Mesopotamia continued to learn Sumerian alongside Akkadian for centuries, just as medieval monks learned Latin long after Rome fell. Temple schools taught Sumerian grammar, literature, and mathematics as sacred knowledge. Kings invoked ancient Sumerian rulers to legitimize their own reigns. To be civilized, in the ancient Mesopotamian imagination, was to be heir to Sumer. The material legacy is equally enduring. The system of cuneiform spread far beyond Sumer, used by empires and merchants from Anatolia to Persia for over 2,000 years. The Sumerian calendar, based on lunar months and a 360-day year, shaped the reckoning of time. Their mathematical innovations, including a basic ST system, still echo today in our division of hours into 60 minutes and circles, into 360 degrees. But perhaps the Sumerians' most profound legacy was the idea of civilization itself, the belief that humanity could organize itself into something larger, more structured, and more enduring than any one generation. They imagined a world where order was crafted from chaos, where law replaced vengeance, where writing conquered forgetfulness, and where the divine could be housed in brick and stone. They built not just walls and temples, but systems of governance, record-keeping, economics, theology, and meaning. They taught humanity that cities could be more than survival centers. They could be engines of culture, hubs of innovation, mirrors of the heavens. They accepted the burdens of power, hierarchy, and bureaucracy because they believed it was worth the price, that through structure, something transcendent could emerge. And for all their flaws, their wars, their inequalities, their eventual collapse, the Sumerians achieved something extraordinary. They gave humanity its second birth, not in the wild, but in the city, not in wandering, but in dwelling, not in forgetting, but in remembering. Sumer is gone. Its language is dead, its kings are dust, its cities silent, but its vision, the dream of civilization, lives on in every law code, every ledger, every temple and city square. The Sumerians imagined it first. We live it still. Long before the pyramids of Giza cast their shadows across the Egyptian sands, long before the great names of Ramses and Tutankhamun echoed across centuries, there existed another land, ancient, proud, and powerful, just beyond Egypt's southern border. This was Nubia, known to the Egyptians as Taseti, the land of the bow. To some, it was a land of mystery. To others, a land of gold, ebony, ivory, and warriors. And for centuries, it was both rival and partner to Egypt, sometimes a trading ally, sometimes a military foe, and eventually, its conqueror. Geographically, Nubia stretched along the Nile Valley from the first cataract at Aswan to the sixth cataract near present-day Khartoum. Its landscape was both harsh and majestic, sun-scorched deserts, jagged hills, and narrow strips of arable land hugging the river. Unlike Egypt's broad, fertile floodplain, Nubia's arable zones were smaller, broken by rocky cataracts that made river travel difficult. Yet it was precisely this terrain, rugged and defensible, that forged a people renowned for their resilience, discipline, and cultural pride. The Nile, as in Egypt, was the lifeblood of Nubia, but the Nile in Nubia was a different river, narrower, swifter, less forgiving. Still, it bound the region together, shaping its economies, settlement patterns, and religious life. Along its banks rose early Nubian cultures like the A group around 380–03–100 BCE. Contemporaries of Egypt's pre-dynastic period, these communities left behind finely crafted ceramics, burial sites, and evidence of long-distance trade, hints of a complex, stratified society forming just beyond Egypt's southern doorstep. By the time Egypt's early dynasties were consolidating power, Nubia was already deeply entangled in its orbit. Egyptian expeditions penetrated the south in search of gold mines, cattle, incense, and slaves. At times, they brought violence and occupation. At others, gifts and commerce. And yet, despite Egypt's size and might, Nubia was never merely a passive recipient of outside influence. From the beginning, it adapted, resisted, and redefined itself. One of the earliest known Nubian polities is Taseti, a term which Egyptian records sometimes use ambiguously, perhaps referencing both a region and a powerful kingdom. Some scholars argue that Taseti predates Egypt's unification and may even have influenced early Egyptian state formation. The rulers of Taseti may have controlled portions of southern Upper Egypt at a time when Egypt was still fragmented. If this is true, it would mean that African statecraft in the Nile Valley began not with Narmer in Egypt, but with a forgotten Nubian king whose name is now lost to history. As Egyptian power expanded southward during the Old Kingdom curve, 2700 to 2200 BCE, Nubia became both a trade route and a military frontier. Egyptian soldiers and surveyors marked out roads, built fortresses, and recorded conquests on rock inscriptions. But while the Egyptians pushed into northern Nubia, they never fully subjugated the southern regions. There, a distinctly Nubian culture flourished, centered around Kerma, a city that would soon rise to rival the glory of any Egyptian capital, Kerma. The namesake of the first great Nubian kingdom was more than just a city. It was the heart of a civilization that, by around 2500 BCE, had emerged as a major power. Its architecture was monumental, its art sophisticated, and its leaders commanded both respect and fear. Egyptian records often refer to the rulers of Kerma as vile Kushites, a term that, though steeped in propaganda, hints at the formidable nature of Nubia's kings. The kingdom of Kerma 2500 a 1500 BCE would dominate Nubia for nearly 1,000 years. It controlled vital trade routes linking Central Africa to Egypt and the Mediterranean. Through its lands flowed gold from the southern mines, incense from tropical forests, giraffe tails, ostrich feathers, and enslaved captives from interior Africa. Its wealth was immense, and so too was its ambition. Kerma was not merely a mirror of Egypt, it was its own world, its own system. Though it borrowed elements of Egyptian religion, art, and language, it maintained a distinct identity. Nubian pottery, burial customs, and temple structures reveal a society confident in its own traditions. Its tombs, especially those of elite rulers, were grand and complex, often accompanied by sacrificial retainers and vast grave goods. These sepulchres rivaled anything found in the Egyptian south and sent a message. This was not a barbarian periphery, but a civilization. By the Middle Kingdom Kerma, 2042–1780 BCE, Egypt sought to extend firmer control over Nubia. Pharaohs launched military campaigns deep into Nubian territory, building fortresses and administrative centers, but resistance simmered, especially beyond the Third Cataract. Despite Egyptian efforts, Kerma endured, and in time, it would strike back. Nubia's story is one of survival, adaptation, and resurgence. It was never simply Egypt's neighbor. It was Egypt's equal in ambition, sometimes its mirror, sometimes its shadow, and eventually, astoundingly, its master. The rise of Kerma is only the beginning. Ahead lies the tale of how Nubian kings would one day turn the tables, march north, and place the crowns of Egypt upon their own heads. But to understand how the bowmen of the south came to rule the north, we must delve deeper into the golden city of Kerma, its palaces, its gods, and the pulse of its royal court. Long before the Kushite pharaohs would rule over Egypt itself, the kingdom of Kerma stood as a beacon of power, wealth, and cultural sophistication in Nubia's rugged landscape. Flourishing roughly between 2500 and 1500 BCE, Kerma was the first truly centralized Nubian state-kingdom that commanded vast resources and controlled critical trade routes, linking sub-Saharan Africa with the Mediterranean world. Far from being a mere outpost or Egypt's satellite, Kerma developed its own identity, political structure, and artistic traditions that rivaled those of its northern neighbor. At the heart of Kerma lay its capital city, also called Kerma, situated strategically near the third cataract of the Nile. This location allowed the kingdom to dominate the flow of goods, people, and ideas moving up and down the Nile Valley. The city was sprawling and complex, with evidence of massive mud brick structures, including a central citadel surrounded by residential quarters and artisan districts. Archaeological discoveries reveal that the city was fortified by large walls, hinting at a need for defense in a region where conflicts with Egypt and rival Nubian polities were frequent. Kerma's rulers projected their authority through grand architecture and elaborate burial practices. The royal cemetery, known today as the Defufa site, includes enormous tumuloburial mounds that cover vast underground chambers filled with riches. These tombs are among the largest in Africa, containing luxury items such as finely crafted jewelry, pottery, weapons, and imported goods like Egyptian alabaster and faience. The presence of Egyptian artifacts alongside uniquely Nubian creations reflects Kerma's role as a nexus of cultural exchange and political power. Religion in Kerma was deeply connected to the land and the ancestors, yet it also incorporated influences from Egypt. The Nubians worshipped a pantheon that included powerful local deities such as Apetmark, the lion-headed warrior god, symbolizing strength and protection. Temples dedicated to Apetmark and other gods were centers not just of worship but of political legitimacy. The king's role was both secular and spiritual. He was the intermediary between the gods and the people, tasked with maintaining harmony and prosperity. Kerma's economy thrived on agriculture, animal husbandry, and especially trade. Its location gave it control over gold mines to the south, making it a major supplier of the precious metal that fueled luxury markets across the ancient world. Cattle were also a vital part of Nubian life, symbolizing wealth and status, and livestock often featured in both ritual and economy. Trade caravans traversed harsh deserts to bring incense, ivory, exotic skins, and even ostrich feathers, while Kerma's craftsmen produced high-quality ceramics and metalwork that were prized far beyond Nubia's borders. Politically, Kerma was a kingdom of strong central authority, supported by a network of local elites and officials. The king's power was symbolized through military might as well as ritual, evidenced by weapons found in royal tombs and iconography depicting him as a mighty warrior. While interactions with Egypt oscillated between trade, diplomacy, and conflict, Kerma was never subservient. It engaged in wars that challenged Egyptian dominance, sometimes successfully resisting Egyptian incursions, other times launching raids into northern territories. The kingdom's power was such that it eventually became a significant player in the politics of the Nile Valley. During periods of Egyptian weakness, such as the Second Intermediate Period, Kerma expanded its influence northward, controlling territory once dominated by the Egyptians. This expansion foreshadowed a future when Nubian kings would take the ultimate prize, the Egyptian throne. However, Kerma's golden age was not destined to last forever. By around 1500 BCE, Egyptian New Kingdom pharaohs, driven by the desire to control Nubia's riches, launched campaigns that temporarily subdued the kingdom. Yet even under Egyptian domination, Nubian culture persisted. The roots laid during Kerma's peak would bloom again centuries later, giving rise to the kingdom of Kush and the rise of the famous Black Pharaohs who ruled Egypt itself. Kerma's story, thus, is not just one of regional power but a testament to resilience and adaptation. It marks the first chapter in Nubia's long and fascinating journey, one that challenges the traditional narratives of African history and highlights the complexity and richness of ancient civilizations south of Egypt. The era of Egyptian domination over Nubia during the New Kingdom, circa 1552–1070 BCE, represents one of the most fascinating and complex chapters in the history of the Nile Valley. This period was characterized not merely by conquest and control, but by intricate layers of political maneuvering, cultural exchange, and persistent resistance that reveal much about the nature of ancient imperialism and the resilience of Nubian identity. Following the expulsion of the Hyksos and the reunification of Egypt under Amos I, Egypt entered a phase of vigorous expansionism. The pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, particularly Thutmose III, sought to secure Egypt's borders and assert dominance over neighboring regions. Nubia, with its abundant gold mines, fertile lands along the Nile, and strategic location, was a prime target. Egyptian military campaigns penetrated deep into Nubian territory, toppling the kingdom of Kingma and other smaller polities. However, the Egyptians understood that maintaining control over this vast and often hostile land required more than military conquest. It necessitated a system of administration, fortification, and cultural integration. Egyptians constructed an impressive network of heavily fortified settlements along the Nile, including well-known sites such as Budden, Semneh, and Uranati. These fortresses were architectural marvels of their time, built with thick mud brick walls, fortified towers, and defensive moats. Their strategic placement at key points along the Nile's cataracts served multiple purposes: controlling river traffic, protecting Egypt's southern frontier, and acting as bases from which Egyptian forces could launch expeditions or quell uprisings to govern this extended territory. The pharaohs appointed the viceroys of Kush, high-ranking officials who acted as the pharaoh's representatives in Nubia. These viceroys were responsible for collecting tribute, overseeing local governance, managing Egyptian settlers and troops, and maintaining order. Their authority was symbolized by elaborate regalia and temples dedicated to Egyptian gods, highlighting their role as intermediaries between the imperial center and the frontier. One of the most significant cultural impositions was the spread of Egyptian religion. Temples dedicated to the god Amen and other Egyptian deities were erected across Nubia, often on or near important Nubian religious sites. The famous temple complex at Jebel Barkal, located near Napata, became a vital religious and political center. Egyptian priests conducted ceremonies to legitimize Egyptian authority, while temples functioned as administrative hubs. These religious institutions helped solidify Egyptian dominance by projecting the pharaoh's divine rule and integrating Nubians into the Egyptian cosmological order. Yet, this apparent cultural dominance was far from complete. Archaeological evidence paints a nuanced picture of coexistence and negotiation. Nubians maintained their own religious beliefs and rituals, worshipping indigenous gods such as Apatmark, the lion-headed warrior deity who embodied Nubian strength and protection. Nubian burial customs persisted, with many graves containing traditional ceramics, jewelry, and other artifacts distinct from Egyptian styles. This blending of Egyptian and Nubian religious elements suggests a syncretic cultural environment where both identities coexisted and influenced each other. The Nubian people were far from passive subjects. The historical record, composed largely of Egyptian inscriptions and reliefs documents numerous revolts and military confrontations. Nubian archers, skilled in guerrilla tactics and highly mobile warfare, harassed Egyptian garrisons and supply lines. Despite their role within the Egyptian military as elite troops, many Nubians retained loyalty to their homeland and occasionally rebelled. The resilience and fighting prowess of Nubian warriors earned them a reputation that was respected and feared throughout the region. Furthermore, Nubian society was organized around powerful local elites who often challenged Egyptian authority. These leaders sometimes forged alliances with neighboring tribes or exploited Egypt's periodic internal turmoil to reclaim autonomy. The Egyptian hold on Nubia was thus a constant struggle, with control fluctuating over time depending on the strength of the central government in Thebes and the local resistance. The decline of Egyptian power at the end of the New Kingdom, around 1070 Vesa, created a power vacuum that Nubian rulers were quick to fill. The collapse of centralized Egyptian authority, due to internal rebellions, economic strain, and external invasions by the Sea Peoples, weakened Egypt's grip on Nubia. In this climate, the Kingdom of Kush emerged as a unified and revitalized Nubian state, centered initially at Napata. Kush built on the legacies of Kerma and the adaptations of the New Kingdom period to forge a new identity, one rooted in Nubian traditions but enriched by Egyptian influences. Kushite rulers portrayed themselves as heirs to the pharaohs, adopting many Egyptian customs and titles, yet also asserting their distinctiveness. This dual identity enabled them to mobilize support both within Nubia and in Egypt. Kush's resurgence would culminate in the 8th century BCE with its most dramatic act, the conquest of Egypt itself and the establishment of the 25th dynasty, where Nubian kings ruled as pharaohs of both lands. In essence, the story of Egyptian domination and Nubian resistance is not a simple tale of conqueror and conquered, but a dynamic interaction between two civilizations. It is a story of adaptation, survival, and eventual triumph, highlighting the strength of Nubian culture and the limits of imperial power. Nubia's ability to retain its identity and eventually reverse the roles, rising from subjected territory to imperial ruler, challenges conventional narratives and enriches our understanding of ancient African history. In the wake of Egypt's New Kingdom collapse, around 1070 BCE, Nubia entered a remarkable period of renewal and expansion that would forever alter the political landscape of Northeast Africa. This era marked the rise of the Kingdom of Kush, a powerful and sophisticated state centered at Napata, near the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal. The Kingdom of Kush was not merely a revival of past Nubian polities, but the birth of a new imperial power, one that would eventually extend its influence northward to conquer and rule Egypt itself. The formation of Kush was shaped by a combination of indigenous traditions and Egyptian influences absorbed during centuries of contact and domination. The Kushite kings embraced Egyptian religious practices, art, and royal iconography, adopting the pharaonic title and presenting themselves as legitimate successors to the Egyptian throne. Yet, Kush retained a strong Nubian identity, expressed through unique language, customs, and political structures. This duality was a source of strength, allowing Kush to navigate complex regional dynamics while asserting its sovereignty. Napata's location at the foot of Jebel Barkal was highly symbolic. The mountain was regarded as a divine residence of the god Amen, and the Kushite kings claimed divine sanction through their association with this sacred site. Temples built at Napata combined Egyptian architectural styles with local elements, becoming centers of both worship and royal power. The Kushite monarchy was deeply intertwined with religion. Kings were seen as both political leaders and high priests, responsible for maintaining cosmic order and prosperity. Economically, Kush thrived by controlling vital trade routes that connected the African interior with the Mediterranean world. The kingdom capitalized on its access to gold mines, agricultural lands, and animal husbandry, while also facilitating commerce in exotic goods such as ivory, ebony, incense, and precious stones. Kushite artisans produced distinctive pottery, jewelry, and metalwork, reflecting a synthesis of Nubian craftsmanship and Egyptian influence. This economic prosperity fueled the kingdom's military and political ambitions. Militarily, the kingdom of Kush was formidable. It inherited and refined the Nubian martial traditions of skilled archery and rapid, flexible tactics. Kushite armies were well organized and capable of both defensive and offensive campaigns. The kingdom's growing strength posed a direct challenge to Egypt's fragmented states during the Third Intermediate Period, when the pharaoh's control weakened and rival dynasties competed for power. In the 8th century BCE, Kushite rulers seized the opportunity to expand their dominion. Under kings such as Alara and Kashta, Kush consolidated control over Upper Nubia and extended its influence northward into Egypt. The apex of this expansion was reached under King Pi, also known as Pianki, who launched a decisive military campaign that led to the conquest of Egypt and the establishment of the 25th dynasty, an era when Nubian kings ruled as pharaohs from Thebes. The 25th dynasty represented a renaissance of Egyptian culture and religion, driven by Nubian values and leadership. Kushite pharaohs undertook extensive building projects, restored temples, and promoted traditional Egyptian art forms. They portrayed themselves as restorers of order and protectors of Mat, the divine principle of truth and justice. Their reign challenged prevailing assumptions about cultural and racial boundaries in ancient history, demonstrating the fluidity and interconnectedness of African civilizations. Yet, the Kushite Empire was not just a replica of Egypt. It maintained distinct Nubian characteristics, balancing Egyptian traditions with indigenous customs. The kingdom's legacy endured long after the 25th dynasty's decline, influencing subsequent Nubian states like Meru, which would become centers of innovation, ironworking, and regional power for centuries. The rise of the kingdom of Kush stands as a testament to the resilience, ingenuity, and ambition of the Nubian people. It reflects a profound narrative of revival and empowerment, illustrating how a once subjugated society could harness its heritage, adapt foreign influences, and ultimately rewrite history on its own terms. The legacy of Nubia is one of enduring transformation, cultural richness, and political resilience that extended far beyond the fall of the 25th dynasty and the retreat of Kushite pharaohs from Egypt. around 656 BCE. After this pivotal moment, Nubia did not fade into obscurity but rather entered a new, flourishing chapter of its history during the Meroitic period. With the rise of the Kingdom of Meru, situated near the sixth cataract of the Nile, Meru would become one of the most remarkable ancient African cities, heralding an era of independence, innovation, and sustained prosperity that lasted for nearly 1,000 years. Mero's location was geographically strategic and resource. It lay at the crossroads of important trade routes connecting sub-Saharan Africa with the Mediterranean world and the Near East. Unlike its predecessor, Napata, Meru was surrounded by vast forests and abundant deposits of iron ore resources that underpinned its economic strength. The city quickly became a hub of iron production and metallurgy. Arguably one of the earliest and most advanced centers of ironworking in the ancient world, the smelting of iron transformed the economy and military capability of Meru, enabling the production of superior weapons, tools, and agricultural implements that fostered both internal development and external influence. The rise of iron technology in Meru signaled a broader technological and cultural flowering. The kingdom developed its own distinctive writing system, the Meroitic script, which remains partially undeciphered but represents one of Africa's earliest indigenous alphasyllabaries. The existence of this script highlights the kingdom's intellectual achievements and the complexity of its bureaucratic and religious institutions. Royal inscriptions and religious texts carved on temple walls, stelae, and artifacts speak to a literate, sophisticated culture that managed to preserve Nubian identity while engaging with Egyptian, Greek, and later Roman influences. Religiously, the Meroitic period was marked by a syncretic blend of indigenous Nubian deities and Egyptian gods, with a distinct emphasis on local cults. The lion-headed god, Apedmak, a uniquely Nubian deity symbolizing war and protection, was particularly venerated alongside Ammon, who continued to hold an important position within the pantheon. The temple complexes at sites such as Naga and Musa Sufra exhibit a unique architectural style characterized by smaller, steep-sided pyramids and intricate relief carvings that, while influenced by Egyptian models, assert a distinctly Nubian aesthetic and religious worldview. The royal cemeteries of Meru are among the most striking archaeological legacies of Nubia. Hundreds of pyramids, smaller and steeper than those of Egypt, serve as tombs for kings, queens, and high-ranking officials, reflecting a highly organized society with elaborate burial customs. These tombs provide invaluable insights into the social hierarchy, religious beliefs, and material culture of the kingdom. They reveal a society that valued both continuity and innovation, all teams' ancestral traditions, while also adapting to new political realities. Politically, the Kingdom of Meru was a resilient monarchy that maintained centralized control over a vast territory for centuries. The Meroitic kings wielded considerable power, not only within Nubia but in their relations with neighboring states. They engaged in complex diplomacy, forging alliances and sometimes confronting major powers such as Egypt, the Ptolemaic dynasty, and later the Roman Empire. Trade was vital to Mero's prosperity, with commodities like gold, ivory, ebony, ostrich feathers, and exotic animals traveling through its markets. This trade connected Meru to the Mediterranean, Arabian Peninsula, and the interior of Africa, making it a crucial node in transcontinental economic networks. Despite its strength, Meru eventually faced challenges from emerging powers and shifting trade routes. The rise of the Aksumite kingdom to the southeast, changing climatic conditions, and political upheavals in the region contributed to its gradual decline around the 4th century CE. However, even as Meru waned, its cultural and political legacy endured, influencing subsequent Nubian states such as Nubia, Macaria, and Alodia Christian kingdoms that thrived in medieval Nubia. The broader legacy of Nubia, from Kerma through Kush to Meru and beyond, offers a profound re-evaluation of ancient African history. It challenges outdated stereotypes that viewed African civilizations as peripheral or derivative. Instead, Nubia emerges as a dynamic center of power, innovation, and cultural exchange. Nubian civilization contributed significantly to the history of the Nile Valley and the wider ancient world, participating in complex networks of trade, religion, and diplomacy. Its resilience under centuries of Egyptian domination, its capacity to absorb and adapt foreign influences, and its eventual rise to imperial power illustrate the rich tapestry of human history in Africa today. Ongoing archaeological discoveries continue to shed light on Nubia's past, revealing layers of history that enrich our understanding of ancient civilizations. The story of Nubia is not just a chapter in African history, it is a vital part of the global human story, one of adaptation, survival, and transformation in the face of shifting empires and cultural encounters. The Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization, stands as one of the earliest and most enigmatic urban cultures of the ancient world. Flourishing from approximately 3,300 to 1300 BCE in what is now modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, this civilization was remarkable for its advanced city planning, sophisticated social organization, and extensive trade networks. Yet, despite decades of archaeological exploration, many aspects of its origins, development, and eventual decline remain shrouded in mystery. The story of the Indus Valley begins in the fertile plains of the Indus River and its tributaries. This region, with its rich, alluvial soil and favorable climate, provided an ideal environment for early agricultural communities to take root. By around 7000 BCE, small villages engaged in farming wheat, barley, and pulses had begun to appear. Over millennia, these simple settlements grew into complex towns characterized by remarkable uniformity in layout and technology, suggesting a high degree of social coordination and central planning. Archaeological discoveries have revealed that the urban phase of the Indus Valley civilization, often called the mature Harappan period c. 2600 to 1900 BCE, featured some of the earliest examples of city planning in human history. Cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dolavira, and Lothor were laid out in precise grid patterns with broad, straight streets intersecting at right angles. Residential neighborhoods were separated from commercial and industrial zones, and sophisticated drainage systems ran beneath the streets, channeling wastewater away from living areas. These features indicate a level of municipal governance and engineering expertise that was unparalleled for its time. One of the most striking aspects of the Indus cities was their standardized construction. Houses were typically made of fired and sun-dried bricks, uniformly sized, which points to regulated production and perhaps centralized control of materials. Public buildings, granaries, and large baths, like the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, communal functions, possibly related to religious or social rituals. Yet, unlike contemporaneous civilizations such as Egypt and Mesopotamia, no monumental palaces or temples have been definitively identified, raising questions about the nature of political and religious authority in Harappan society. The origins of the Indus Valley civilization are linked to a series of gradual cultural and technological innovations. Early farming communities developed irrigation techniques to harness the seasonal floods of the Indus River. Advances in pottery, metallurgy, and textile production allowed these societies to support growing populations and diversify their economies. By the 3rd millennium BCE, these developments culminated in the emergence of fully urbanized centers, connected by a vast network of trade routes. Trade played a central role in the growth and sustainability of the Indus cities. Archaeological evidence indicates that the Harappans engaged in commerce with distant regions, including Mesopotamia, the Iranian Plateau, and Central Asia. Goods such as lapis lazuli, carnelian beads, copper, and textiles were exchanged, and seals bearing the distinctive Indus script have been found far beyond the civilization's core area. These interactions highlight the integration of the Indus Valley into a broader system of Bronze Age commerce and cultural exchange. Despite the wealth of material culture, uncovered pottery tools, jewelry, weights, and seals, the Indus script remains undeciphered. This absence of a readable written record limits our understanding of the social structure, governance, religion, and everyday life of the Harappan people. It has also fueled numerous theories, some speculative, about the civilization's organization. Some scholars argue for a highly centralized state controlled by an elite class, while others suggest a more decentralized, perhaps collective form of governance. Religious beliefs in the Indus Valley are equally enigmatic. Archaeologists have identified figurines, animal motifs, and symbolic artifacts that may have served ritualistic purposes. The famous priest-king statue, though its precise identity is debated, hints at the existence of religious or political leaders. The prevalence of fertility symbols, mother goddess figurines, and sacred animals, such as the bull, suggests a complex, spiritual life tied closely to natural cycles and agrarian concerns. The decline of the Indus Valley civilization around 1900 BCE remains one of the great archaeological puzzles. Gradual abandonment of major cities, changes in settlement patterns, and the apparent loss of urban planning all point to a systemic transformation rather than sudden collapse. Scholars propose various explanations: environmental changes, such as shifts in river courses, prolonged droughts, or resource depletion; disruptions caused by migrations or invasions; or internal social upheaval. Recent research has highlighted evidence of tectonic activity affecting the river systems and the weakening of trade links with Mesopotamia, all of which likely contributed to the civilization's gradual disintegration. Yet, the legacy of the Indus Valley civilization endured in subsequent cultures across South Asia. Elements of Harappan urbanism, craftsmanship, and religious motifs influenced later societies, laying the groundwork for the emergence of the Vedic civilization and shaping the cultural evolution of the Indian subcontinent. The Indus Valley thus stands as a foundational chapter in the story of human civilization, a testament to early ingenuity, adaptability, and complexity. The cities of the Indus Valley civilization stand as enduring monuments to an ancient society that mastered urban planning and complex social organization, long before many of their contemporaries. Unlike the monumental palaces and temples seen in Egypt or Mesopotamia, the Indus cities impressed through their remarkably consistent design, technological sophistication, and evidence of an egalitarian social structure that remains a topic of scholarly debate. At the heart of this civilization were sprawling urban centers such as Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dolavira, and Lothal. These cities were meticulously laid out in grid patterns that maximized efficiency and order. Streets ran perpendicular to each other, forming precise right angles, and were often broad enough to accommodate carts and foot traffic simultaneously. Houses were constructed using standardized fired bricks, indicating centralized regulation or widespread adherence to common architectural norms. The sophistication of their municipal infrastructure is best exemplified by the advanced drainage and sanitation systems discovered beneath many streets. Covered drains lined with bricks carried wastewater away from homes to cesspits or the river, a feature virtually unparalleled in the ancient world at this time. Such public health measures point to a communal concern for hygiene and suggest the presence of governing bodies or councils responsible for urban maintenance. Residencies varied in size, ranging from modest single-room dwellings to multi-room houses with courtyards, reflecting a possible hierarchy of wealth or family size. Yet there is scant evidence of extreme social stratification. Unlike other ancient civilizations where monumental tombs or palaces signified ruling elites, the Harappan cities show little evidence of overt aristocracy. Instead, the lack of grandiose monuments and palatial structures suggests a society potentially organized around collective decision-making or decentralized power. Economically, the Indus Valley civilization was highly diversified and interconnected. Agriculture formed the backbone of their economy, with crops like wheat, barley, peas, and cotton cultivated using irrigation techniques that took advantage of the seasonal flooding of the Indus River. Archaeobotanical studies have revealed a diet rich in cereals and legumes, supplemented by domesticated animals such as cattle, sheep, goats, and water buffalo. Trade was central to urban prosperity. The civilization's strategic location allowed it to act as a nexus for commerce between South Asia, Central Asia, and Mesopotamia. Archaeological finds include standardized weights and measures, which facilitated fair trade and economic regulation. These weights, often cubical and made of chert or faïences, were remarkably uniform across the region, underscoring the existence of standardized systems that promoted trust and efficiency in commerce. The variety and craftsmanship of artifacts found in the cities further illustrate a vibrant economy and skilled artisanship. Jewelry crafted from gold, carnelian, and lapis lazuli speaks to both local production and long-distance trade, since materials like lapis lazuli were imported from Afghanistan. Pottery, metal tools, seals, and beads reflect a complex division of labor and the presence of specialized craftspeople within the urban workforce. Religious life in the cities, while not fully understood, reveals a fascinating blend of symbolism and ritual. Small terracotta figurines, often interpreted as fertility goddesses, suggest an emphasis on fertility and the cycles of nature. Animal motifs, particularly bulls, elephants, and monkeys, feature prominently on seals and pottery, hinting at their sacred significance. The recurring unicorn motif on seals remains one of the most mysterious emblems of the civilization, despite the extensive archaeological record. The lack of deciphered written texts complicates efforts to fully comprehend Harappan governance and religion. The Indus script, found mainly on seals and tablets, remains an enigma. Some scholars propose it was used primarily for administrative purposes rather than religious texts or literature. This limited textual record makes it difficult to ascertain whether the civilization was ruled by a king, a council, or some other political structure in the end. The cities of the Indus Valley civilization represent an extraordinary chapter in human history. Their balanced urban design, innovative technology, and integrated economic systems demonstrate a society deeply attuned to order, efficiency, and harmony with its environment. Though many mysteries remain, these cities continue to captivate researchers and the public alike, offering invaluable insights into early urban life and the development of complex societies. The Indus Valley civilization's remarkable longevity and prosperity were fueled not only by its urban planning and agricultural base, but also by its extensive trade networks, technological innovations, and dynamic cultural exchanges with neighboring regions. These elements created a complex web of interaction that connected the Harappan cities to the wider Bronze Age world, underscoring their role as a vibrant hub of commerce and creativity. Trade was the lifeblood of the Indus economy, driving the flow of goods, ideas, and technologies across vast distances. Archaeological evidence shows that the Harappans maintained commercial links extending westward into Mesopotamia, southward along the Arabian Sea, and northward into the mountainous regions of Central Asia and Afghanistan. Goods such as precious stones, metals, cotton, textiles, and crafted beads traveled these routes, supporting urban demand and promoting wealth accumulation. Mesopotamian texts refer to a distant land called Meluha, widely believed by scholars to be the Indus region. These records mention the exchange of commodities like carnelian beads, ivory, and exotic woods, illustrating the mutual interest and trade interdependence between these two ancient civilizations. Indus seals, often engraved with animals and inscriptions, have been discovered in Mesopotamian cities like Ur and Susa, confirming the existence of Harappan merchants abroad and their active participation in interregional trade. The port city of Lothal, situated near the modern-day coast of Gujarat, was a critical center for maritime commerce. Lothal's well-planned dockyard, one of the world's earliest known, enabled the safe harboring and loading of ships involved in sea trade across the Arabian Sea and beyond. From here, vessels likely reached the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Peninsula, and perhaps even East Africa, connecting the Indus civilization to a far-reaching network of exchange that linked multiple continents. Technological innovation was another hallmark of Harappan society. The mastery of metallurgy, especially copper and bronze working, facilitated the production of tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects. The precision evident in their bronze figurines and intricate jewelry reflects not only artisanal skill but also sophisticated metallurgical knowledge. Equally important was the use of standardized weights and measures, which underpinned commercial transactions and ensured equitable trade practices across the civilization. Pottery production exhibited technical refinement as well. Harappan potters crafted durable ceramics with uniform shapes and painted geometric designs, demonstrating an advanced understanding of materials and kiln technology. Similarly, beadmaking was a highly specialized craft, using semi-precious stones such as carnelian and jasper. Artisans shaped beads with remarkable symmetry and polish, some using techniques like heat treatment to enhance color and durability. The cultural interactions facilitated by trade extended beyond mere material goods. Artistic motifs, religious symbols, and technological knowledge flowed along these networks, fostering shared ideas and adaptations. For example, the depiction of bulls and mythical creatures on seals and artifacts may reflect both local beliefs and wider Near Eastern influences. The use of seals themselves for administrative and commercial purposes parallels practices in Mesopotamia, suggesting a degree of cultural borrowing and adaptation. Moreover, the Indus Valley civilization was not an isolated entity, but part of a dynamic Bronze Age world. Interactions with the Iranian plateau introduced new materials and techniques, while exchanges with Central Asian cultures may have contributed to the spread of domesticated crops and animals. This interconnectedness highlights the civilization's role as a conduit of innovation and cultural synthesis in ancient times. Despite these extensive networks, the Harappans maintained a distinct cultural identity characterized by unique urban design, language, and social practices. The balance between openness to external influences and preservation of indigenous traditions speaks to the civilization's resilience and adaptability. The eventual decline of these trade networks, possibly due to environmental changes, shifts in river courses, or geopolitical upheavals, contributed significantly to the weakening of the Indus civilization. Reduced access to key resources and disruption of long-distance commerce undermined economic stability, hastening urban abandonment and cultural transformation. Nevertheless, the legacy of the Indus Valley's trade and technology endured. Elements of Harappan craftsmanship, urbanism, and commercial practice influenced subsequent South Asian cultures and beyond. The civilization's achievements stand as testament to the power of connectivity and innovation in shaping human history. The social fabric and spiritual life of the Indus Valley civilization reveal a society that was complex yet enigmatic, deeply connected to the rhythms of nature, and organized in ways that continue to intrigue scholars, although the absence of deciphered written records poses challenges. The rich archaeological evidence offers glimpses into the everyday experiences, belief systems, and social organization of the Harappan people. Socially, the Indus Valley civilization appears to have been remarkably egalitarian compared to other ancient urban cultures. Unlike the rigidly hierarchical societies of Mesopotamia and Egypt, Harappan cities lack clear evidence of ostentatious palaces or monumental tombs dedicated to rulers or elites. Instead, the uniformity in house construction and city layout suggests a society where wealth disparities were moderate, and power may have been more diffusely distributed. Neighborhoods within cities varied in size and complexity, from modest single-room homes to larger residences with courtyards and multiple rooms, indicating some degree of social differentiation. However, even the largest homes did not display extravagant luxury, which points to a community possibly organized around collective governance or councils rather than monarchic or despotic rule. The social organization likely included specialized occupational groups, craftspeople, potters, beadmakers, metalworkers, and traders inhabited distinct areas of the cities, emphasizing a division of labor vital for urban life. Artifacts related to these trade stools, molds, kilns have been found clustered in specific districts, demonstrating that labor was both specialized and geographically organized. Family life and gender roles, while not fully understood, can be inferred through figurines and burial practices. Small terracotta figurines depicting women, often interpreted as fertility goddesses, suggest a spiritual emphasis on fertility and motherhood. These figurines, sometimes adorned with elaborate jewelry and headdresses, might indicate the veneration of female deities or the importance of women within the domestic and religious spheres. Religious beliefs were deeply interwoven with nature and daily existence. The Harappans worshipped a pantheon that included animals, fertility symbols, and natural forces, though without the grand temples and priestly hierarchies seen in other ancient civilizations. The recurring motifs of bulls, elephants, snakes, and the mysterious unicorn on seals may have represented clan symbols, protective spirits, or divine entities. Central to Harappan religious practice was water and purification, exemplified by the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro. This large, watertight pool may have served ritual bathing purposes, symbolizing cleansing and spiritual renewal. Its presence within the city's core indicates the cultural significance of water in both practical and sacred contexts. Burial customs offer further insight into beliefs about death and the afterlife. Harappan graves, often simple pit burials or bricklined chambers, sometimes included grave goods such as pottery, beads, and tools, suggesting an awareness of an existence beyond death. However, unlike the elaborate tombs of Egypt, these graves reflect modesty and uniformity, reinforcing ideas of social equality. The diet of the Harappans was diverse and nutritious, based largely on domesticated grains like wheat and barley, supplemented by fruits, vegetables, and livestock. Archaeological evidence shows the cultivation of cotton, making the Indus Valley one of the earliest centers of cotton production. This agricultural base supported growing urban populations and fostered trade in textile goods. Education and knowledge transfer, though difficult to reconstruct, were likely facilitated through apprenticeship and oral traditions, given the lack of deciphered scripts. Craftspeople would have passed down their skills through generations, preserving technical expertise and artistic styles. In all, the daily life of the Indus people was marked by a balance of work, worship, and community. Their urban environment, clean, well-organized, and harmonious, reflects values of order, cooperation, and respect for natural resources. Though much about the social and religious life of the Indus Valley civilization remains a mystery, the material culture speaks of a people who lived with an intricate awareness of their environment and each other. Their legacy invites us to reconsider assumptions about early civilizations and to appreciate the rich diversity of human experience. In the ancient world, the decline of the Indus Valley civilization marks one of the most captivating and debated chapters in ancient history. Once a flourishing network of cities renowned for their urban sophistication, trade connections, and cultural vitality, by around 1900 BCE, the civilization began a slow and complex process of transformation and eventual dissolution. Understanding this decline involves unraveling a web of environmental, economic, social, and possibly political factors that together contributed to the fading of one of the world's earliest great urban cultures. Environmental changes are often cited as a primary cause of the Indus decline. The civilization's prosperity was intimately tied to the Indus River system, which provided water for agriculture, transportation, and daily living. Geological and paleo-environmental studies suggest that shifts in the courses of major rivers, including the drying up or diversion of the Gagahakra River, possibly the ancient Sarasvati, dramatically altered the landscape. Such changes would have disrupted irrigation systems, diminished fertile lands, and forced populations to abandon established settlements in search of new resources. Prolonged droughts and climate fluctuations may also have exacerbated these difficulties. Evidence from sediment cores and fossilized pollen indicates periods of decreased monsoon rainfall that would have stressed agricultural production. Crop failures and food shortages could have led to social unrest, population migrations, and the breakdown of urban centers. Economic factors played a significant role as well. The extensive trade networks that once linked the Indus cities with Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and the Iranian plateau began to wane. Archaeological records show a decline in the volume and quality of traded goods, suggesting that commerce became less reliable or profitable. The disappearance of Harappan seals in Mesopotamian sites corresponds with the decline of Mesopotamian city-states during the same period, indicating a broader regional collapse that affected interconnected economies, social dynamics may have further contributed to the civilization's weakening. While Harappan society appears to have been relatively egalitarian, the stresses of environmental and economic challenges could have strained communal governance structures. Increasing competition for resources might have led to internal conflicts or changes in social organization that undermined urban cohesion. The lack of clear evidence for military fortifications or warfare suggests that if conflict occurred, it was likely more subtle or internal rather than large-scale invasions. By around 1700 BCE, many of the major Harappan cities were largely abandoned or reduced to smaller settlements. Some populations migrated eastward toward the Ganges Plain, where new cultural patterns began to emerge. This movement may have contributed to the foundation of later Vedic culture, blending remnants of Harappan traditions with incoming Indo-Aryan influences. Despite the decline of urban centers, the legacy of the Indus Valley civilization endured in profound ways. Technological innovations in metallurgy, urban planning, and standardized weights and measures influenced subsequent South Asian cultures. The tradition of city layout, with grid patterns and sanitation systems, reappeared in later historical periods, testifying to the lasting impact of Harappan urban design. Cultural motifs and religious symbols from the Indus valleys, such as fertility figurines, animal iconography, and ritual bathing practices, persisted in regional folk traditions and early Hinduism, suggesting spiritual continuities across millennia. Moreover, the civilization's mastery of crafts, especially bead-making and metallurgy, shaped artistic expressions that resonated far beyond its temporal span. The mystery of the undeciphered Indus script continues to captivate scholars and enthusiasts, holding the promise of unlocking deeper insights into this lost civilization's governance, beliefs, and daily life. Ongoing excavations and technological advances in archaeological methods may one day illuminate these hidden chapters. In sum, the decline of the Indus Valley civilization was not a sudden catastrophe, but a gradual transformation influenced by environmental upheavals, economic shifts, and social change. Its legacy, however, is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. The Indus cities stand as early monuments to complex society, innovative, interconnected, and enduring. Echoes still resonate in the cultural and historical tapestry of South Asia. Nestled in the heart of the eastern Mediterranean, the island of Crete stands as the cradle of one of Europe's earliest and most enigmatic civilizations, the Minoans. Flourishing from roughly 3000 to 1450 BCE, the Minoan civilization emerged in a landscape of rugged mountains, fertile plains, and a coastline indented with natural harbors, creating the perfect backdrop for a society shaped by both the land and the sea. Crete's strategic location at the crossroads of three continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, gave the Minoans an unparalleled advantage in the Bronze Age world. Situated between the Greek mainland to the north, the Near East to the east, and North Africa to the south, Crete became a vital maritime hub, linking diverse cultures and economies. This geographical positioning would define the character of Minoan society, fostering a vibrant culture marked by seafaring prowess, trade, and artistic innovation. The island's topography is marked by towering mountain ranges bisecting fertile valleys where rivers fed the land, enabling early agricultural development. The abundance of natural resources such as timber, olive oil, and minerals provided the economic foundation for Minoan growth. Archaeological evidence points to the cultivation of wheat, barley, grapes, and olives, crops well suited to Crete's Mediterranean climate. Early inhabitants of Crete began settling in small farming villages around 7000 BCE, gradually developing sophisticated techniques in pottery, weaving, and metallurgy. By the 3rd millennium BCE, these communities had evolved into complex social structures, capable of building monumental architecture and establishing far-reaching trade networks. The Minoans' mastery of the sea was instrumental in their rise. Unlike many contemporary civilizations confined to river valleys, the Minoans embraced maritime life, constructing swift ships that navigated the Mediterranean's azure waters. Their ships plied routes connecting Crete with Egypt, the Levant, the Cycladic Islands, and the Greek mainland, facilitating not only the exchange of goods, but also the flow of ideas and cultural influences. The island's numerous natural harbors, such as those near the modern cities of Heraklion and Chania, served as bustling ports where merchants and sailors converged. These harbors became gateways through which exotic goods like gold, ivory, precious stones, and fine pottery passed, feeding Crete's economy and elevating its status as a cultural beacon. Geographical isolation from the mainland, tempered by these maritime connections, allowed the Minoans to develop a distinctive artistic and architectural style. The vibrant frescoes that adorned palace walls and the elegant designs on pottery reflect a society attuned to beauty, nature, and the divine. The natural environment also shaped religious beliefs. The reverence for mountain peaks, caves, and sacred groves, alongside the prominent role of bull symbolism, suggests a spirituality deeply rooted in the rhythms of the land and sea. Crete's landscape was not merely a setting, but an active participant in the Minoans' worldview. Yet, despite their island's relative isolation, the Minoans were anything but secluded. Their geography positioned them as cultural intermediaries, absorbing influences from Egypt's grandeur, Mesopotamia's innovation, and Anatolia's traditions, while projecting their own distinct identity across the Mediterranean. Understanding the origins and geography of Crete thus provides essential context for the Minoan civilization's achievements. It reveals how environment and location intertwined to foster a culture that was simultaneously grounded in place and expansive in vision, an ancient maritime power whose legacy would ripple through the ages. At the core of Minoan civilization, sprawling across the island of Crete, stood the grand palace complexes, vast architectural marvels that were not merely royal residences but multifaceted centers of political power, economic control, religious, ritual, and cultural expression. Among these palaces, Knossos emerges as the quintessential example, providing scholars with an unparalleled window into Minoan society, its intricacies, and daily rhythms. Yet Knossos was but one of several major palace centers, including Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros, each contributing to a network of urban hubs that anchored the civilization. Unlike the fortress-like citadels that dominate the archaeological record of contemporaneous civilizations in the Near East and Egypt, Minoan palaces embody a distinctive architectural philosophy, one that emphasizes openness, complexity, and harmony with the environment rather than imposing defense. The Palace of Knossos sprawls over more than 20,000 square meters, consisting of an intricate labyrinth of interconnected rooms, corridors, staircases, light wells, and courtyards that confound and fascinate in equal measure. The very layout seems to echo myth, inviting speculation that it inspired the Greek legend of the Minotaur's labyrinth. These palaces were built in phases over centuries, evolving from simple Neolithic settlements into monumental centers characterized by their multi-story constructions, extensive use of ashlar masonry, and innovative features like terracotta pipes for drainage. The architecture incorporates natural light and ventilation, showing a sophisticated understanding of climate control and urban comfort. Central to the palace's function was its role as an administrative and economic nerve center. The presence of large storage magazines rooms lined with massive pithoi ceramic storage jars indicates centralized collection and management of agricultural produce such as grain, olive oil, and wine. This system points to a bureaucratic organization capable of overseeing surplus production, storage, and redistribution, a hallmark of complex state societies. The ability to stockpile resources would have provided resilience against famine and facilitated trade. Archaeological excavations have revealed rooms dedicated to specialized craft production within the palace precincts. Workshops for pottery, seal carving, metallurgy, and textile production illustrate the high level of craft specialization and economic diversity. The artifacts produced ranged from everyday utilitarian objects to exquisite luxury items: bronze weapons, gold jewelry, intricately carved seals that reflect both functional and aesthetic sophistication. One of the most intriguing aspects of Minoan palatial administration is the use of written scripts. While the Linear B script of later Mycenaean Greeks has been deciphered, the Minoan Linear A remains an undeciphered mystery. Clay tablets and seal impressions found within palace archives suggest a complex system of record-keeping, accounting, and perhaps legal transactions, revealing that literacy and bureaucracy were integral to Minoan governance. Urban life radiated outward from these palatial centers. Surrounding the palaces were smaller towns and villages connected by a network of well-maintained roads and footpaths. The houses, often constructed with stone foundations and mud brick upper walls, varied in size but generally featured multiple rooms organized around courtyards. These homes reveal attention to comfort and privacy, with spaces designated for cooking, storage, and family life. Some residences included bathrooms with drainage systems, demonstrating a remarkable commitment to hygiene and public health, an aspect rare for the time. The drainage and sanitation systems within Minoan palaces and urban settlements were particularly advanced. The discovery of terracotta pipes, cesspits, and flush toilets in places like Naxos highlights the Minoans' engineering ingenuity and concern for the welfare of their inhabitants. This sophisticated infrastructure would have helped prevent the spread of disease and contributed to overall urban sanitation. Public and ceremonial spaces within the palaces were arenas for social interaction, religious ceremonies, and possibly marketplaces. Large central courtyards at Naxos and other sites provided venues for communal gatherings, festivals, and performances. The palatial frescoes' vivid dynamic wall paintings depict scenes of religious rites, bull-leaping acrobatics, and nature, capturing the cultural vibrancy of Minoan society and its connection to both spirituality and daily life. Religious practice in Minoan urban centers was deeply embedded in the architecture. Palaces contained shrines and sanctuaries, with altars and ritual spaces often adorned with symbols such as the double axe, labaries, sacred horns of consecration, and depictions of deities. The prominence of female figures and goddesses in art and iconography suggests that the Minoan religious landscape may have been centered on a powerful goddess cult or metrifical spirituality, emphasizing fertility, nature, and renewal. The political organization of the Minoan world remains a subject of scholarly debate. While some evidence points to the existence of a ruling priest-king or elite class based in the palaces, The relatively peaceful nature of the society and lack of fortifications suggest a form of governance based on religious authority, economic control, and diplomacy, rather than military dominance. The integration of administrative, religious, and economic functions within the palaces underscores the centralized yet complex nature of Minoan power. In essence, Minoan palaces were the pulsating hearts of their civilization, complex, multifunctional hubs where governance, economy, religion, and culture intersected. The design and operation of these centers reflect a society that prized innovation, harmony, and interconnectedness. Urban life was characterized by a balance between individual domesticity and collective engagement, facilitated by infrastructure that promoted health, economic activity, and spiritual practice. The palace's open design and lack of defensive walls also speak to the Minoans' confidence in their maritime strength and regional influence. By mastering the seas, the Minoans could project power and secure trade networks across the Mediterranean, reducing the need for heavy fortifications and enabling their cities to flourish as centers of peace, culture, and commerce. The lifeblood of the Minoan civilization was undeniably its economy. Intricately woven around the pulsating rhythms of the Mediterranean Sea, the island of Crete's prime geographical position enabled the Minoans to become master maritime traders and economic innovators, establishing a network of exchange that spanned thousands of miles and linked diverse cultures from Egypt to the Near East. The Cycladic Islands and the Greek mainland, at the heart of Minoan economic vitality, was an impressive command of seafaring, technology, and navigation. Their ships, though details remain partly speculative, were clearly advanced for the era, equipped to traverse open waters and harness seasonal winds to maintain regular trade routes. The Minoans' seafaring skills were not simply for trade, but also critical for maintaining political and cultural connections across the Aegean and beyond, enabling them to act as intermediaries between powerful civilizations. Crete itself was rich in natural resources that fueled its economy. The island's fertile plains yielded abundant harvests of cereals, olives, grapes, and figs, staples that formed the foundation of local subsistence and surplus trade. Olive oil, in particular, emerged as a key export, prized for its culinary, ritualistic, and cosmetic uses across the ancient Mediterranean world. The Minoans' ability to produce and store surplus agricultural products is evidenced by large storage pithoi found in palace complexes, demonstrating centralized control and redistribution mechanisms that underpinned economic stability. Beyond agriculture, Crete's mineral wealth contributed significantly to the Minoan economy. The island's hills provided timber, valuable metals such as copper and tinder, essential ingredients for bronze and precious stones. Metalworking was a highly developed craft, with artisans producing sophisticated tools, weapons, and ornate jewelry. These goods were not only for local consumption, but also major commodities in trade networks, often exchanged for luxury items like gold, ivory, and exotic spices. Trade routes radiated outward from Crete like spokes on a wheel, connecting the Minoans to a vast Mediterranean world. Egyptian artifacts found in Minoan sites, such as faience beads and scarabs, alongside Minoan pottery discovered in Egyptian tombs, illustrate a vibrant exchange of goods and ideas. The Minoans also traded extensively with the Levantine coast, Anatolia, and the Cyclades, participating in a cultural and economic symbiosis that enriched all parties. Minoan pottery, especially the fine wares decorated with naturalistic motifs, dolphins, lila, became a sought-after commodity. reflecting both aesthetic appeal and technical excellence. These ceramics were widely exported, serving as markers of Minoan presence and influence across the Mediterranean basin. The economy was further supported by complex social institutions. The palace bureaucracy played a crucial role in regulating production, taxation, storage, and distribution. Clay tablets inscribed in the still undeciphered Linear A script suggest meticulous record-keeping related to inventories, labor, and trade transactions. This administrative system helped ensure that resources were efficiently allocated and that trade networks operated smoothly. Maritime trade was not without risks. The Minoans' investment in naval technology and shipbuilding underscores their commitment to protecting and expanding their economic interests. While their palaces lacked defensive walls, it is likely that Minoan ships acted as both commercial vessels and deterrents against piracy or hostile incursions, securing the sea lanes vital to their prosperity. Economically, the Minoans exemplified a model of interconnectedness, where agriculture, craft specialization, trade, and administration coalesced into a dynamic system. This economic foundation enabled the civilization to flourish culturally and politically, projecting influence far beyond the shores of Crete. In summary, the Minoan economy was a sophisticated tapestry woven from the threads of maritime expertise, resource abundance, craft mastery, and expansive trade networks. This economic vitality not only sustained the civilization, but also laid the groundwork for the cultural efflorescence that made the Minoans a beacon of the Bronze Age Mediterranean world. Religion permeated every facet of Minoan life, intertwining with art and culture to create a civilization rich in symbolism, ritual, and aesthetic brilliance. Unlike many contemporaneous societies that often portrayed male warrior deities or powerful kings, the Minoans' spiritual world appears centered on the feminine divine and the rhythms of nature, revealing a unique worldview that celebrated fertility, renewal, and harmony with the natural environment. At the heart of Minoan religion was a pantheon dominated by goddesses, evidenced by abundant depictions of female figures in frescoes, figurines, and seals. These goddesses are often associated with fertility, animals, and the earth, underscoring the civilization's close connection to the cycles of growth and the natural world. Shrines and sacred spaces within palaces and caves frequently include symbols such as the double-axe labaries, sacred horns, and snake elements, believed to represent divine power, protection, and regeneration. Religious practice was not confined to formal temples, which are notably absent in the Minoan archaeological record. Instead, ritual permeated everyday spaces. Open-air sanctuaries, mountain peaks, sacred caves, and palace courtyards served as sites for ceremonies, reflecting an intimate relationship between worshippers and the landscape. The emphasis on nature worship suggests a spirituality deeply rooted in the environment's life-giving forces. Bull symbolism, perhaps the most iconic emblem of Minoan religion, reveals a complex blend of reverence and ritual drama. The bull appears repeatedly in art and myth, from dynamic frescoes depicting bull leaping daring and dangerous, acrobatic rituals to sculpted horns of consecration that adorned palatial architecture. The bull may have symbolized strength, fertility, and the connection between the mortal and divine realms. Embodying the raw vitality of life itself, Minoan art, whether frescoes, pottery, sculpture, or jewelry, reflects an extraordinary sophistication and keen observation of the natural world. Frescoes discovered at Nasus Akrotiri and other sites burst with vibrant colors and fluid forms, capturing scenes of nature, marine life, flowers, birds and human activity with remarkable realism and movement. The emphasis on natural motifs, along with the absence of violent or militaristic imagery, highlights a culture that valued beauty, celebration, and the harmonious coexistence of humans and nature. The frescoes also provide glimpses into social life depicting processions, athletic events, music, and dance, suggesting a society that embraced public spectacle and ritualized social gatherings. These images convey a dynamic, joyous culture that balanced solemn religious reverence with vibrant community expression. Material culture further reinforces Minoan artistic mastery. Pottery, often decorated with elegant marine and floral motifs, was not only utilitarian but also a canvas for artistic innovation. Metalworkers fashioned intricate jewelry and ceremonial objects from gold, bronze, and precious stones, demonstrating technical skill and aesthetic sensibility. The intertwining of religion and culture extended into Minoan architecture, where sacred symbols were incorporated into the very fabric of palaces and shrines. Decorative elements such as griffins, serpents, and the labyrinths not only beautified spaces but also imbued them with spiritual significance, creating environments where the divine presence was tangible. In sum, the religious beliefs and artistic achievements of the Minoans reveal a civilization deeply connected to the natural world and attuned to the cycles of life and renewal. Their culture celebrated the feminine divine, embraced ritual as a communal experience, and expressed these values through breathtaking art and architecture. This fusion of spirituality and creativity stands as a testament to the Minoans' enduring legacy as one of the ancient world's most enlightened and inspiring civilizations. The story of the Minoan civilization, with all its brilliance and innovation, ultimately culminates in a mystery that has captivated historians, archaeologists, and scholars for over a century: the decline and eventual disappearance of this maritime power from the Mediterranean stage. Unlike many ancient civilizations that fell primarily due to foreign conquest or internal collapse, the Minoans' decline appears to have been a complex and multifaceted process, shaped by natural disasters, shifting geopolitical forces, and cultural transformations. The first signs of trouble for the Minoans emerge around 1600 BCE. During the late Minoan period, when the palatial centers show evidence of destruction and rebuilding, the most cataclysmic event associated with this era is the massive eruption of the Thera volcano, modern-day Santorini, which occurred roughly around 1600 to 1500 BCE. This eruption is considered one of the largest volcanic events in recorded history, sending towering ash clouds high into the atmosphere and triggering tsunamis that devastated coastal communities throughout the Aegean. The impact of the Thera eruption on Crete was profound. Archaeological layers across the island reveal widespread ash deposits and signs of destruction consistent with seismic activity and flooding. The palaces, including Knossos, bear evidence of fire and structural damage, likely linked to this natural catastrophe. While the Minoan civilization was resilient enough to rebuild after this disaster, the eruption disrupted trade routes, agricultural production, and the social order, weakening the once vibrant maritime network. Simultaneously, the rise of the Mycenaeans, an Indo-European, Greek-speaking people from the mainland, introduced a new and powerful cultural and political force in the region. By the late Bronze Age, Mycenaean influence is increasingly visible on Crete. Through changes in pottery styles, burial practices, and administrative systems, Linear B script, the early form of Greek writing, begins to appear alongside the Linear A, signaling a shift in control. Around 1450 BCE, many Minoan palaces were destroyed or abandoned, and archaeological evidence suggests the Mycenaeans took over administrative centers, transforming the island into a satellite of their expanding mainland kingdom. The exact nature of this transition, whether through invasion, peaceful assimilation, or internal decline, remains debated, but it marked the end of the Minoan civilization as an independent cultural entity. Despite their decline, the legacy of the Minoans endured long after their political power waned. Their artistic innovations influenced Mycenaean culture, which inherited and adapted many Minoan motifs, religious practices, and technological advancements. The myth of King Minos and the labyrinth born from Minoan architecture and bull-leaping rituals persisted in Greek mythology, embedding Minoan culture deep into the classical imagination. Furthermore, the Minoans' maritime trade networks and cultural exchanges laid foundational groundwork for the subsequent flourishing of Greek civilization. Their achievements in urban planning, craftsmanship, and religious symbolism continued to resonate, shaping Mediterranean history for centuries. In modern times, the rediscovery of the Minoans through the excavations of Sir Arthur Evans at Naxos in the early 20th century revolutionized our understanding of ancient Europe. The Minoans challenged previous narratives of cultural development, illustrating that advanced, peaceful, and artistically rich societies thrived long before the classical Greek era. In essence, the decline of the Minoan civilization was not an abrupt end but a transitional passing of the torch to the Mycenaeans, and ultimately to the classical world. Their story is a testament to the fragility and resilience of human societies, and their legacy remains an enduring beacon illuminating the dawn of European civilization. Long before the Maya reached the heights of their famed classic civilization, their origins were rooted in a profound transformation of human life that unfolded gradually over millennia in the heart of Mesoamerica. The story of the Maya begins in the lush, fertile landscapes of southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, regions defined by diverse environments ranging from tropical rainforests to highland plateaus. These varied ecosystems provided the natural resources and climatic conditions necessary for early human groups to experiment with new ways of living. Around 2000 BCE, the earliest archaeological evidence points to a gradual shift among small, hunter-gatherer bands toward a more settled existence. This epoch marked the advent of sedentism, a pivotal development in human history where communities began to establish permanent villages, rather than following seasonal game or foraging patterns. The driving force behind this transition was the domestication of key crops, the triumvirate of maize, corn, beans, and squash, commonly referred to as the Mesoamerican agricultural triad. Maize, in particular, was far more than sustenance. It became a cultural and spiritual cornerstone, deeply embedded in Maya cosmology and identity. The Maya myth of creation famously depicts humans fashioned from maize by the gods, symbolizing life itself. The domestication and intensive cultivation of maize revolutionized Maya society. As agricultural productivity increased, populations expanded, allowing communities to grow both in size and complexity. This demographic growth sparked technological innovation, with new tools for farming, food storage, and pottery emerging to meet the demands of a sedentary lifestyle. Early villages in the pre-classic period, roughly 2000 BCE to 250 CE to 250 CE, were modest but laid the groundwork for a complex civilization. Archaeological sites reveal simple dwellings clustered around central plazas and ceremonial platforms, where early religious activities likely took place. These spaces served not only as community gathering points, but also as expressions of emerging social hierarchies and political organization. As centuries passed, some villages evolved into early towns with larger populations and increasingly complex infrastructures. Architectural advancements appeared, marked by the construction of monumental platforms, pyramids, and bulwarks, the earliest examples of which date back to this period. These structures reflected a growing centralization of religious and political power, as elites sought to legitimize their authority through grand building projects and ritual ceremonies. Two of the most remarkable pre-classic sites, Nubia and El Mirador, located in Guatemala's dense Piton rainforest, stand as testimony to this period of profound urban and cultural development. Excavations at El Mirador have uncovered colossal pyramids, such as La Danta, which remains one of the largest pyramid complexes by volume anywhere in the world. The sheer scale of these structures, built centuries before the peak of classic Maya civilization, challenges earlier assumptions that the Maya were late bloomers in urban complexity. These architectural feats required coordinated labor, sophisticated knowledge of engineering and hydraulics, and a social structure capable of mobilizing resources on an unprecedented scale. Alongside architectural innovations, artistic and technological advancements flourished. Pre-classic Maya artisans crafted exquisite pottery painted with symbolic and natural motifs, created intricate jade jewelry, and shaped obsidian tools and weapons with precision. The art of this era reflects a society increasingly concerned with religious symbolism and status differentiation. Social stratification became more pronounced during the pre-classic period. Burial sites reveal the emergence of an elite class, distinguished by grave goods such as jade beads, ornate ceramics, and obsidian blades. These elites likely included a priestly or shamanistic class, responsible for conducting rituals, maintaining calendars, and acting as intermediaries between the people and the gods. The presence of such specialized roles points to a complex political organization that went beyond kinship ties and simple village councils. Trade networks expanded during this formative era, connecting the Maya to other Mesoamerican cultures. Commodities such as obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for its sharpness, salt, essential for food preservation and ritual, jade, valued for its rarity and spiritual significance, and exotic feathers from tropical birds flowed through intricate exchange routes. These networks facilitated not only economic prosperity but also cultural exchange, spreading religious ideas, artistic styles, and technological innovations. Perhaps one of the most intriguing features of the pre-classic Maya was their early experimentation with writing and calendrical systems. While the fully developed Maya script would emerge later during the classic period, proto-writing symbols and calendar notations have been discovered on ceramics and monuments from this era, suggesting that the seeds of their sophisticated intellectual traditions were sown early. By the close of the pre-classic period, the Maya had transformed from small farming communities into complex urban societies, complete with social hierarchies, religious institutions, monumental architecture, and extensive trade networks. These foundational developments set the stage for the explosive growth and cultural fluorescence that would characterize the classic Maya civilization, positioning them as one of the most advanced and enigmatic cultures of the ancient Americas. The classic period of Maya civilization, spanning roughly from 250 to 900 CE, represents the zenith of Maya cultural, political, and architectural achievement, a golden age marked by the rise of powerful city-states, intricate political alliances, fierce rivalries, and remarkable artistic and intellectual flourishing. During these 6 centuries, the Maya developed an unparalleled civilization in the ancient Americas, with a complex socio-political landscape that rivaled any in the ancient world. At the heart of this era were the independent city-states, autonomous polities, each governed by a divine ruler known as the Adjor. These rulers, often hereditary monarchs, wielded tremendous power, combining both secular authority and religious leadership. They were seen as intermediaries between the gods and their people, responsible for maintaining cosmic order through ritual, warfare, and governance. Each city-state was a political entity with its own territorial control, economic resources, and military forces, often engaging in alliances or conflicts with neighboring polities. Some of the most prominent city-states of the classic period include Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Copan, Caracol, and Yaxchila, names that resonate today thanks to monumental ruins scattered across the dense jungles of Mesoamerica. These cities were centers of political power, religious activity, and cultural production, boasting massive temple pyramids, palaces, ball courts, and intricate networks of causeways connecting urban areas. Tikal, located in present-day northern Guatemala, emerged as one of the most dominant powers during the Classic period. Its monumental architecture, such as the towering Temple 4, demonstrates its status and ambition. Tikal was a political heavyweight, capable of waging large-scale wars and forging strategic alliances. The city's rulers commissioned detailed stelae and inscriptions carved in hieroglyphics that recorded dynastic histories, military victories, and sacred rituals, an invaluable record that has helped modern scholars piece together Maya political history. Opposing powers, like Calakmul in the southern Yucatan Peninsula, formed extensive alliances often referred to as the Snake Kingdom. The rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul epitomizes the complex geopolitics of the Maya world, a delicate balance of power maintained through intermittent warfare, marriage alliances, tribute, and diplomacy. This political chess game often involved proxy battles fought by smaller city-states aligned with one superpower or the other. The political landscape was anything but static. City-states experienced periods of ascendancy and decline, with shifting allegiances and internal strife common. Some rulers sought to expand their influence by conquering rival cities, exacting tribute, or imposing their ideology through monumental architecture and public ceremonies. Warfare was a significant aspect of classic Maya politics, serving not only to gain territory but also to capture prisoners for ritual sacrifice, reinforcing the divine right of kings. Despite their independence, many Maya city-states shared cultural and religious frameworks, facilitating a degree of cohesion within this fragmented political system. Shared beliefs about cosmology, ritual calendars, and pantheons created a unifying identity that transcended political boundaries. This cultural cohesion was further reinforced by the widespread use of the Maya hieroglyphic script, which allowed rulers and scribes to record their histories, legitimizing their rule and propagating royal ideology. The art and architecture of this period provide vivid insights into the political and religious life of the Maya elite. Palaces were richly decorated with stucco sculptures, frescoes, and carved lintels depicting gods, ancestors, and royal ceremonies. Ball court sites of ritual sport with profound cosmological significance were common fixtures, symbolizing the eternal struggle between order and chaos. The Classic period also saw the refinement of the Maya calendar system and astronomy. Rulers commissioned elaborate calendar monuments to mark important dates tied to religious ceremonies, royal births, accession to the throne, and celestial events. This obsession with timekeeping and divine cycles reinforced the ruler's sacred role in maintaining the balance between the earthly and the supernatural realms. Beneath the grandeur of the elites lay a complex society of artisans, farmers, traders, and laborers who sustained the economic base of these city-states. Agriculture, particularly the cultivation of maize, beans, and squash, was vital. Terracing and irrigation techniques maximized productivity in a challenging tropical environment. Markets and trade networks facilitated the exchange of goods ranging from salt and cacao to precious jade and obsidian. Yet, despite their achievements, the classic Maya political system was inherently fragile, marked by rivalries and competition that, over time, contributed to instability. Environmental pressures, internal dissent, and external threats would eventually culminate in the mysterious decline of many of these once great city-states by the late 9th century CE. In sum, the classic period stands as a testament to the Mayas' extraordinary capacity to build complex political systems, artistic legacies, and intellectual traditions, all woven together in a vibrant tapestry of city-states competing for power, prestige, and divine favor amidst the jungles of Mesoamerica. The classic Maya civilization was not merely a collection of city-states competing for political dominance. It was also a deeply intricate society defined by complex social structures, rich cultural expression, and a profoundly spiritual worldview that permeated every aspect of daily life. Understanding Maya society means delving into its hierarchical layers, religious beliefs, artistic achievements, and intellectual pursuits, elements that combine to create one of the most sophisticated civilizations of the ancient Americas. At the top of the social hierarchy stood the Ajotha, divine king or queen, who wielded both political and religious authority. The ruler was believed to be the earthly representative of the gods, tasked with maintaining harmony between the mortal world and the supernatural realm. This sacred role was reinforced through elaborate rituals, military conquests, and monumental constructions that celebrated the ruler's power and lineage. The royal family was surrounded by an elite class of nobles, priests, and scribes who managed the administration, religious ceremonies, and the creation of the written record. Below the elites was a class of skilled artisans, traders, and bureaucrats, who played crucial roles in sustaining the economy and culture. Artisans produced exquisite works in jade, pottery, textiles, and stone, often commissioned by the elite to decorate palaces and temples or to serve as grave offerings. Traders facilitated the movement of goods such as obsidian blades, cacao, salt, and precious feathers across vast distances, integrating the Maya into expansive Mesoamerican exchange networks. At the foundation of society were the farmers and laborers who cultivated maize, beans, squash, and other crops, providing the vital sustenance for the population. Agriculture was the backbone of Maya life, and communities developed sophisticated farming techniques such as slash-and-burn cultivation, terracing, and raised fields to adapt to the tropical environment. These farmers not only produced food, but also participated in communal labor for public works and construction projects, demonstrating a society interconnected through both social obligations and shared cultural identity. Religious belief was central to Maya society, deeply intertwined with their understanding of the cosmos, time, and human destiny. The Maya believed in a multi-layered universe consisting of an upper world inhabited by gods, the earthly plane where humans lived, and an underworld known as Xibalba, place of death and trials. This cosmology was reflected in their rituals, mythology, and art, creating a rich spiritual framework that shaped social behavior and governance. Maya religion centered on the worship of a pantheon of gods associated with natural elements such as the sun, moon, rain, maize, and death. The maize god, in particular, held supreme importance, symbolizing life, death, and rebirth, the agricultural cycle, and human existence itself. Rituals involved offerings, dances, bloodletting by rulers, and sometimes human sacrifice, which were believed to sustain the gods and ensure cosmic balance. The Maya calendar system was a marvel of intellectual achievement, combining two interlocking cycles: the Tzolk'in, a 260-day ritual calendar, and the Hob, a 365-day solar calendar. This complex calendrical system regulated religious ceremonies, agricultural activities, and political events. The Maya also developed the long count calendar, which allowed them to track historical dates across centuries, a testament to their sophisticated grasp of mathematics and astronomy. Writing was another pillar of Maya culture. The Maya script, one of the few fully developed writing systems of the ancient Americas, was a combination of logograms and syllabic signs, used to record historical events, genealogies, and religious texts. Monumental inscriptions on stele, altars, and temple walls provide rich narratives of royal achievements, battles, rituals, and cosmological myths. Scribes held a revered status, serving as keepers of knowledge and legitimizers of royal authority. Art and architecture during the Classic period reflected this intertwined social and spiritual fabric. Palaces and temples were adorned with stucco sculptures, painted murals, and carved lintels depicting gods, ancestors, and royal ceremonies. Iconography was highly symbolic, often illustrating themes of power, sacrifice, and cosmic order. The Maya ball game, played in specialized courts, was not merely a sport, but a ritual reenactment of mythological battles between forces of light and darkness. Education and knowledge transmission were also vital. Primarily conducted within elite circles, children of nobility were trained in reading hieroglyphs, astronomy, ritual practice, and governance, ensuring the continuation of cultural and political traditions. This emphasis on learning underpinned the remarkable intellectual achievements of the civilization. Despite the grandeur of elite life, it is important to recognize the interconnectedness of Maya society. Rituals and festivals involved broad participation, reinforcing community bonds and collective identity. Religion and social order were maintained not only through royal decree but also through shared belief systems and cultural practices that permeated all levels of society. In sum, the Maya civilization was a richly layered society where political power, religion, culture, and daily life were inseparably linked. Their legacy of monumental art, complex hieroglyphic writing, advanced calendrics, and spiritual depth continues to fascinate scholars and inspires modern descendants who keep Maya traditions alive today. The enigmatic decline of the classic Maya civilization remains one of the most captivating and debated chapters in ancient history. By the late 9th century CE, many of the great city-states that had flourished for centuries, once vibrant centers of political power, culture, and religious life, were suddenly abandoned. Their monumental temples and palaces slowly reclaimed by the dense jungle. This widespread collapse did not occur uniformly across the Maya world, nor was it the result of a single cause. Instead, it appears to have been a complex process. involving a web of interrelated factors, environmental, social, political, and economic, that gradually eroded the foundations of classic Maya society. For decades, scholars sought to unravel this mystery, proposing a variety of theories ranging from devastating warfare and foreign invasion to catastrophic natural disasters. Today, a more nuanced understanding emerges from interdisciplinary research combining archaeology, paleoclimatology, epigraphy, and ecology, painting a picture of a civilization under intense strain. One of the most influential theories centers on environmental degradation and climate change. Archaeological evidence suggests that the burgeoning populations of the Classic period placed tremendous pressure on the land. Intensive agriculture, including slash-and-burn techniques and deforestation to clear fields, may have led to soil depletion and erosion, reducing agricultural productivity. When coupled with evidence from sediment cores and cave stalagmites, paleoclimatic data indicate a series of prolonged droughts struck the Maya lowlands during the 9th century. These droughts would have severely diminished water availability, stressed crops, and undermined food security for urban populations. Faced with food shortages and declining resources, the social fabric of Maya cities began to unravel. Internal unrest and competition for scarce resources likely increased tensions among ruling elites and commoners alike. Some cities show signs of intensified warfare and political instability during this period, as rulers struggled to maintain control. The abandonment of elaborate royal tombs and the destruction of monumental inscriptions hint at dynastic collapse and loss of political legitimacy. Warfare was a double-edged sword. While it could expand territory and influence, prolonged conflict drained resources and destabilized regional alliances. Increasing evidence points to a surge in violent confrontations among city-states, with fortifications and mass graves indicating turbulent times. The capture and ritual sacrifice of rival elites, a practice long part of Maya warfare, may have escalated, feeding cycles of revenge and destruction. Social upheaval was likely exacerbated by the rigid hierarchical system, as rulers relied on divine authority to justify their power. Failures, such as famine or military defeat, could erode their legitimacy. Popular revolts or abandonment by laborers and artisans could have crippled urban economies and disrupted construction and maintenance of vital infrastructure like water, reservoirs, and canals. Economic factors also played a role. Trade networks, which had linked the Maya to distant regions for goods like obsidian, jade, and cacao, appear to have weakened. Disruption of these exchanges would have deprived city-states of essential materials and symbolic prestige items, further undermining elite power. It is important to recognize that the collapse was not uniform. While many southern lowland cities experienced decline and abandonment, other areas, such as the northern Yucatan, saw continued occupation and cultural development well into the post-classic period. Cities like Chichén Itzá and Mayopan rose to prominence after the classic collapse, indicating that Maya civilization endured in evolving forms. Moreover, the collapse did not mean the disappearance of the Maya people. Descendants of the classic Maya continued to live in the region, maintaining many aspects of their language, traditions, and beliefs that survive to this day. The cultural legacy of the classic period laid the foundation for these enduring communities. In sum, the mysterious collapse of the classic Maya civilization was the result of a convergence of environmental stress, prolonged drought, social and political turmoil, warfare, and economic disruption. This multifaceted decline reminds us that even the most sophisticated societies are vulnerable to a complex interplay of internal and external challenges. The ruins left behind, silent testaments to a once glorious civilization, continue to inspire awe and scholarly inquiry, inviting us to learn from the rise and fall of one of history's greatest ancient cultures. The story of the Maya does not end with the enigmatic collapse of their classic cities. Rather, the legacy of this remarkable civilization continues to resonate through the centuries, alive in the culture, traditions, and identity of millions of Maya people who inhabit Central America today. Understanding this enduring legacy means appreciating the resilience, adaptation, and vibrant continuity of Maya heritage amidst changing historical and social landscapes. Following the decline of the classic period city-states around the 9th century CE, the Maya world entered what scholars call the post-classic period, roughly 900 to 1500 CE. While many southern lowland cities were abandoned, other centers in the northern Yucatan Peninsula, such as Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and later Mayopan, flourished. These cities reflect both continuity and change, building upon classic traditions of architecture, art, and ritual, while incorporating new influences through trade and interaction with other Mesoamerican cultures, such as the Toltecs and later the Aztecs. The post-classic Maya saw shifts in political structures, with power often more decentralized, and the rise of confederations and shifting alliances rather than the rigid dynastic monarchies of the classic era. Religious practices evolved as well, with an increased emphasis on warrior cults and new deities, reflecting changing social and political realities. The arrival of the Spanish conquistadors in the early 16th century marked a profound rupture for the Maya. The invasion brought devastating warfare, disease, forced labor, and cultural disruption. Spanish colonization sought to dismantle indigenous political systems and impose Christianity, often violently suppressing traditional beliefs and languages. Despite these upheavals, Maya communities demonstrated remarkable resilience. Many retained their language, customs, and social structures, often blending indigenous traditions with imposed Christian elements in unique syncretic forms. Today, an estimated 6 million Maya people live across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. They speak over 30 distinct Maya languages, preserving linguistic diversity that traces back thousands of years. Modern Maya communities maintain traditional agricultural practices, weaving, pottery, music, and dance, continuing cultural expressions that are deeply rooted in their ancient heritage. Maya's spirituality remains vital, blending reverence for ancestral gods, nature, and cosmology with Catholic rituals introduced during colonial times. Ceremonies often center on the cycles of agriculture and the sacred calendar, with shamans and elders playing key roles as custodians of traditional knowledge. Pilgrimages to ancient ruins and sacred mountains sustain connections to a shared past. Archaeological discoveries over the past century have reignited global interest in Maya civilization, uncovering new insights into their achievements and history. Advances in epigraphy have enabled scholars to decipher Maya hieroglyphs, revealing intricate narratives of kings and queens, wars, diplomacy, mythology, and daily life that had been hidden for centuries. These breakthroughs have transformed understanding from seeing the Maya as a mysterious, isolated culture to appreciating them as sophisticated historians and astronomers with a rich intellectual tradition. At the same time, the preservation and interpretation of Maya heritage pose challenges. Many ancient sites lie threatened by looting, environmental degradation, and tourism pressures. Indigenous communities often advocate for greater control over archaeological resources and recognition of their cultural rights. Efforts to revitalize Maya languages and traditions are underway, supported by local organizations, governments, and international bodies dedicated to cultural preservation. The legacy of the Maya is also evident in modern cultural and academic fields. From ethnobotany to astronomy, linguistics to art history, the Maya continue to inspire research and creative expression. Their ancient achievements in mathematics and calendrics, such as the concept of zero, and sophisticated astronomical cycles, the intellectual prowess of pre-Columbian America, and challenge Eurocentric narratives of human history. In contemporary society, Maya identity serves as a powerful source of pride and resilience amid social and economic challenges. Indigenous activism seeks to secure land rights, political representation, and social justice, asserting the ongoing presence and contributions of the Maya people in national and global contexts. In conclusion, the Maya civilization's legacy is a living continuum rather than a static relic of the past. It is a vibrant fusion of ancient wisdom, cultural endurance, and modern adaptation that enriches the diverse mosaic of human heritage. From monumental ruins reclaimed by the jungle to the voices and traditions of Maya communities today, this legacy offers profound lessons on survival, creativity, and the enduring power of cultural identity. The legend of Atlantis has captivated the human imagination for over 2 millennia, inspiring philosophers, mystics, explorers, scientists, and conspiracy theorists alike. It is a tale that begins not with ancient ruins or recovered artifacts, but with a pair of dialogues penned by the Greek philosopher Plato in the 4th century BCE, the Timaeus and Critias. In these texts, Plato relays a story he claims originated in Egypt and was passed down to his ancestor Solon, the great Athenian lawgiver. According to this account, Atlantis was a vast and powerful island empire located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, generally understood to be the Strait of Gibraltar. This civilization, said to have flourished over 9,000 years before Plato's time, was technologically advanced, militarily powerful, and fabulously wealthy, its cities gleaming with gold, ivory, and orichalcum, a mysterious metal more precious than gold. The Atlanteans, descended from the god Poseidon and a mortal woman named Cleito, had created a utopian society governed by laws, virtue, and harmony with nature. But over time, they became corrupt, greedy, and imperialistic, attempting to conquer the Mediterranean world, including ancient Athens, which Plato casts as a model of virtuous resistance. The gods punished this hubris with a cataclysmic disaster in a single day and night. Atlantis vanished beneath the waves, its location lost to time and memory. Plato's purpose in telling the story of Atlantis was primarily philosophical. He used it as a moral allegoria, cautionary tale of the dangers of pride, decadence, and overreaching ambition. Scholars have long debated whether Plato intended his account as pure fiction, symbolic parable, historical memory, or a blend of all three. Unlike his contemporaries, who often invoked myths uncritically, Plato was careful to frame Atlantis within the context of moral decay, civic virtue, and ideal governance. However, beginning in antiquity and growing dramatically during the Renaissance and Age of Exploration, many began to wonder whether Atlantis was not merely a literary device, but a real place, one whose ruins lay hidden under the sea or buried beneath modern cities. In the 19th and 20th centuries, fueled by colonial discovery, theosophy, and new spiritual movements, Atlantis took on new dimensions. Writers such as Ignatius Donnelly popularized the idea that Atlantis was the primordial source of all major civilizations. In his 1882 book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, Donnelly argued that Atlantis was the cradle of human civilization, influencing ancient Egypt, the Americas, and even Scandinavia. He tied the biblical flood, the myths of other ancient cultures, and geological cataclysms together, proposing a vast, non-submerged continent in the Atlantic Ocean. Though lacking scientific backing, Donnelly's book inspired generations of speculative thinkers and became the blueprint for countless pseudo-historical interpretations. Simultaneously, occult traditions and esoteric philosophies absorbed Atlantis into their cosmologies. The Theosophical Society, founded by Helena Blavatsky, described Atlantis as one of several lost root races, a spiritually advanced civilization destroyed by misuse of psychic power. This mystical interpretation cast Atlantis not merely as a place, but as a stage in cosmic human evolution. Ancient Hindu concepts of yugas, or cycles of destruction and rebirth. Later, figures like Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, claimed to receive visions of Atlantean life during trances. Cayce's Atlantis was a spiritually and technologically advanced society that fell due to corruption and misuse of energy crystals, and he predicted that remnants of Atlantis would rise again in the Caribbean throughout the 20th century. Scientific archaeology dismissed Atlantis as a myth, but popular culture continued to breathe life into it. Books, films, and documentaries reimagined it as everything from a prehistoric superpower to an alien colony. The allure of Atlantis rests not only in its grand scale and mysterious demise, but also in its symbolic power. It embodies humanity's yearning for a forgotten golden age, the fear of self-destruction, and the hope of rediscovering lost wisdom. Atlantis, in this light, is not just a lost city. It is a mirror of civilization itself, reflecting our greatest aspirations and deepest anxieties. Moreover, Atlantis has often been conflated with other lost civilizations across history. Some point to the Minoans of Santorini, wiped out by a volcanic eruption, others to Doggerland in the North Sea, or submerged landmasses in the Caribbean or Southeast Asia. The legend, though born in Plato's texts, has become a cultural template into which we project real archaeological mysteries, unexplained ruins, and folk memories of catastrophe. It is the myth that never dies, because it is continually reborn, transformed by the needs and dreams of each generation. As we begin to explore Atlantis and other so-called lost worlds in this final episode, it is essential to recognize that the fascination with such places tells us as much about our present as it does about the past. Whether Atlantis was real or imagined, it endures as a symbol of what we have lost, what we fear, and what we long to regain. And in that sense, the search for Atlantis is ultimately a search for ourselves. The legend of Atlantis, though born from Plato's imagination and philosophical aims, has never remained confined to ancient Greek dialogues. Over the centuries, scholars, explorers, mystics, and scientists have sought to match Plato's description to actual places on Earth, sparking one of the most enduring and expansive geographical hunts in human history. This search for a real Atlantis has yielded a fascinating array of candidates, each offering its own blend of geographical alignment, archaeological mystery, and tantalizing possibility. While none of these sites has definitively answered the riddle, each reveals something profound about the human desire to reconcile myth with reality and to locate the roots of civilization in the depths of time and earth. Perhaps the most compelling candidate for a historical Atlantis is the Minoan civilization, centered on the island of Crete and the nearby island of Thera. Modern days, the Minoans flourished from approximately 2700 to 1450 BCE and are recognized as one of Europe's earliest advanced civilizations. They built sprawling palace complexes like Knossos, developed a written script, Linear A, traded widely, and cultivated a rich artistic and religious culture. The eruption of the Thera volcano around 1600 BCE was one of the most powerful in recorded history, unleashing tsunamis, ash clouds, and widespread devastation. Some scholars argue that this disaster, combined with subsequent Mycenaean invasions, led to the rapid decline of the Minoans. Crucially, this event fits many elements of Plato's account. A powerful maritime civilization suddenly destroyed by natural catastrophe, leaving cultural echoes across the Mediterranean. Though the chronology doesn't match Plato's timeline exactly, he places Atlantis' fall 9,000 years before his own time. Proponents of this theory suggest either a mistranslation or mythological distortion over centuries. The sophistication of the Minoans, the evidence of sudden destruction, and their proximity to the Greek world make them one of the strongest archaeological analogues to Atlantis. Another contender is Hellike, a city in ancient Greece itself. Located on the northern coast of the Peloponnese, Hellike was a wealthy and well-known city in classical times. In 373 BC, Aegis, a generation before Plato wrote the Timaeus, Hellike was destroyed by a violent earthquake and tsunami. The entire city sank into the sea overnight, according to historical records by contemporaries such as Diodorus and Pausanias. For centuries, Hellike was considered lost, until underwater archaeologists discovered its remains in the 1990s, submerged under layers of silt and seawater. The story of Hellike, especially given its dramatic and sudden destruction, may have influenced Plato's conception of Atlantis, or served as a contemporary cautionary tale. Though Hellike was small compared to the grand empire Plato describes, its fate may have helped shape the narrative structure and emotional resonance of his myth. To the west, proponents of a more literal interpretation of Plato's geography point to the Azores Islands, located in the mid-Atlantic Ocean, as possible remnants of Atlantis. These islands lie beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, aligning with Plato's description of Atlantis existing beyond the Pillars of Heracles. Early modern cartographers and explorers, particularly during the Age of Discovery, believed the Azores could be the mountaintops of a once submerged continent. Sonar surveys and underwater mapping around the region have occasionally revealed unusual seabed structures, though none have provided conclusive proof of a sunken civilization. Still, the Azores and the surrounding mid-Atlantic ridge have remained central to Atlantis. Theories that place the lost world in the Atlantic Ocean proper. Another tantalizing theory shifts the focus further south, to the Richet structure in Mauritania, also known as the Eye of the Sahara. This massive, circular formation, visible from space, measures over 40 kilometers across and displays striking concentric rings, features eerily similar to Plato's description of Atlantis' capital city, which he claimed was made up of alternating rings of land and water. While the Richet structure is a natural geological formation, some alternative researchers argue it could be the eroded remains of a long-lost man-made site. Proponents point to the size, shape, and possible signs of ancient human habitation in the surrounding area, though mainstream archaeology maintains that there is no evidence of an advanced civilization ever existing there. Still, The location in northwest Africa has ignited new interest in re-evaluating Saharan prehistory and forgotten episodes of ancient human occupation in now deserted regions. Yet another line of inquiry links Atlantis with the Caribbean and the Americas. This theory gained traction in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially after the rediscovery of sophisticated ancient civilizations in Mesoamerica and the Andes. Some theorists proposed that Plato's account referred not to the Mediterranean world, but encoded older, transoceanic memories, possibly distorted over time. Figures like Charles Berlitz and Edgar Cayce connected Atlantis to the Bahamas, Cuba, and particularly the Bimini Road, a submerged rock formation near Bimini Island. Some believe this structure is a man-made remnant of Atlantean architecture, though geologists generally regard it as a naturally occurring arrangement of beach rock. These theories often weave together linguistic coincidences, geological anomalies, and spiritualist visions, straddling the line between pseudoscience and speculative history. Other candidates include Antarctica, which some believe was Atlantis, before a pole shift buried it in Esau theory, largely discredited, but persistent in fringe circles and Doggerland, a now submerged landmass in the North Sea that once connected Britain to mainland Europe and supported Mesolithic human populations. While Doggerland was real and its inundation by rising seas around 6500 BCE is well documented, no evidence of an advanced civilization has been found there. What unites all these theories is not merely a search for physical ruins, but a search for meaning. Atlantis represents not only the lure of a glorious lost age, but also a mirror for our hopes, fears, and uncertainties. Each candidate reflects different aspects of the Atlantis myth: natural disaster, imperial hubris, sudden collapse, cultural grandeur, and spiritual decline. Whether in the ashes of Santorini, the drowned streets of Helike, the desert rings of the Sahara, or the submerged coastlines of the Atlantic, the human mind sees patterns, possibilities, and questions. Could we have lost a civilization once as advanced as ours? Could it happen again? In this light, the pursuit of Atlantis becomes more than an archaeological mystery. It becomes a cultural ritual, a way for each generation to contemplate the fragility of civilization, the impermanence of greatness, and the deep, unspoken memory of catastrophe etched into our collective psyche. While the myth of Atlantis remains the most famous account of a sunken civilization, it is far from the only legend that speaks of ancient worlds lost to time and water. In cultures across the globe, from the flood myths of Mesopotamia and India to the drowned lands of Europe and the Pacific, there are tales of once great societies swallowed by the sea. These stories, echoing across distant regions and time periods, suggest a shared cultural memory of catastrophic environmental change. In recent decades, archaeological discoveries have begun to uncover real cities and landscapes that were indeed submerged by rising waters, tectonic activity, or coastal erosion, places that seem to offer glimpses of a forgotten chapter in the human story. Though none quite match the mythic scope of Atlantis, these sites provide compelling evidence that our ancient ancestors witnessed and endured disasters of stunning scale and perhaps passed those memories down through generations, encoded in myth, ritual, and legend. One of the most striking examples is Dwarka, located off the coast of Gujarat, India. In Hindu mythology, Dwarka was a golden city ruled by the god Krishna, a divine hero who is said to have founded a magnificent kingdom on the western edge of the Indian subcontinent. According to ancient texts like the Mahabharata, this city was eventually swallowed by the sea after Krishna's departure from the mortal world. For centuries, scholars believed Dwarka to be purely mythical. But in the early 2000s, marine archaeologists from India's National Institute of Ocean Technology discovered a series of stone structures submerged beneath the Arabian Sea near modern Dwarka. The layout of the underwater features rectangular building foundations, grid-like street patterns, and a possible harbor suggests a once thriving settlement that was inundated by rising sea levels, perhaps during the end of the last ice age, though debates continue over the dating and nature of these remains. The discovery has reignited questions about how much of myth may be grounded in reality, and how many ancient coastal cities may lie hidden beneath the seas that have since reclaimed them. Another submerged city that has drawn attention is Pavlopatri, off the coast of Laconia, Greece, discovered in 1967 and later mapped in detail with advanced sonar. Pavlopatri is considered the oldest known underwater city in the world, dating back to around 3000 BCE. Unlike most lost cities, Pavlopatri has an unusually well-preserved layout, complete with roads, two-story buildings, courtyards, tombs, and what appears to be a sophisticated drainage system. This level of urban planning indicates a mature, organized society, one that may have engaged in trade and cultural exchange with other Aegean and Mediterranean powers. The city was likely abandoned and submerged due to a combination of earthquakes and rising sea levels. While Pavlopatri makes no claims to Atlantean grandeur, its very existence serves as a powerful reminder that the sea has claimed more of human history than we often realize. In Southeast Asia, similar mysteries lie beneath the waves. Off the coast of Yonaguni, a small island in Japan's Ryukyu archipelago, divers in 1986 discovered an enormous underwater rock formation that bears a striking resemblance to a stepped pyramid or temple complex. Dubbed the Yonaguni Monument, the site includes large, flat terraces, sharp right angles, and stair-like features that some believe are too precise to be purely natural. While many geologists argue that the structures are the result of natural erosion along tectonic fault lines, others insist they show signs of human modification, and possibly even inscriptions or carvings. If man-made Yonaguni could represent the ruins of a civilization lost during the last glacial melt, possibly more than 10,000 years ago, however, no conclusive artifacts such as tools, pottery, or bones have been found in situ, leaving the debate unresolved. Still, the Yonaguni formation invites an uncomfortable question. If ancient humans did build coastal structures millennia ago, how many such monuments now lie hundreds of feet beneath the ocean surface, beyond the reach of ordinary exploration? Another compelling case lies beneath the Bay of Cambay Comhot, also in India. In 2001, sonar scans revealed what appeared to be a vast urban complex on the sea floor, including geometric patterns, rectangular grids, and what some researchers identified as possible buildings and roads. The Indian team that discovered the site proposed that it may date back over 9,000 years, an assertion that, if verified, would rewrite the history of early urban civilization. Critics argue that the sonar readings are inconclusive and that artifacts recovered from the area may have been deposited there by river currents rather than from a sunken city. Nevertheless, the idea that complex societies may have existed, then been lost during the warming and sea level rise at the end of the last ice age, remains a tantalizing possibility. In Europe, legends of Doggerlander, now submerged land bridge, that once connected Britain to mainland Europe, have been brought to life by recent archaeological and geological discoveries. During the last ice age, Doggerland was a vast, habitable plain, rich in flora and fauna. It supported Mesolithic communities of hunter-gatherers for thousands of years, but as glaciers melted and seas rose, Doggerland gradually disappeared, eventually vanishing completely beneath the North Sea around 6000 BCE today. Fishing trawlers and underwater excavations occasionally pull up remnants of this lost world, bones of mammoths and ancient deer, flint tools, and even the remains of human settlements. While Doggerland was not a city or empire, its loss was a traumatic, drawn-out process that may have inspired oral traditions of a drowned world, stories that perhaps mutated over millennia into myths of floods and lost continents. There are similar tales across the Pacific, where myths of sunken lands abound. In Polynesia, the legends of Hiva and Mu speak of ancestral homelands swallowed by the ocean. In Hawaii, the sunken land of Kanaloa is said to lie beneath the waves, a place of spirits and forgotten ancestors. Western writers in the 19th century, influenced by these myths, imagined a lost continent named Lemuria, supposedly located in the Indian or Pacific Ocean and serving as the cradle of an ancient race. Though modern science has thoroughly debunked Lemuria as a geological impossibility, the myth persists in esoteric literature and spiritual belief systems, showing how powerful and persistent the idea of submerged civilizations remains, taken together. These examples from Dwarka and Pavlopetri to Doggerland and Yonaguni highlight the sheer scale of human history that may lie beneath the sea. Hidden by time and transformed into myth, sea levels have risen over 120 meters since the last glacial maximum, submerging tens of millions of square kilometers of coastal land. Given that early human civilizations often arose along coastlines and river deltas, it stands to reason that many early settlements were lost when the waters rose. Each discovery adds a fragment to the puzzle, suggesting that behind the myth of Atlantis may lie a larger truth, not of a single lost civilization, but of many lost worlds, forgotten not because they were insignificant, but because they were erased by forces beyond human control. In the next segment, we will delve deeper into these global flood myths, from the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh to the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, and explore how ancient peoples remembered, recorded, and mythologized the destruction of their lands. These myths may not offer coordinates, but they do offer clues to the emotional and cultural memory of catastrophe, giving us insight into how our ancestors made sense of a changing planet. Long before Plato wrote of Atlantis, long before any archaeologist laid eyes on sunken ruins or seabed sonar readouts, human beings were telling stories, deep, haunting stories about floods. Not ordinary floods, but great deluges, walls of water that swallowed the world, drowned cities, reshaped continents, and punished the pride of humanity. These myths of cataclysmic inundation are among the most widespread and enduring in human culture, appearing in sacred texts, oral traditions, and creation stories from nearly every corner of the globe. Why are they so universal? Is it merely coincidence, or do these tales reflect a shared ancestral memory, echoes of real, ancient disasters that shaped the collective psyche of our species? One of the oldest and most famous flood myths comes from Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. The Epic of Gilgamesh, dating back to at least 2100 BCE, recounts the tale of Utnapishtim, a righteous man warned by the gods to build a vast boat before a divine deluge swept the world. Utnapishtim's ark, filled with animals and family, survives the storm, eventually coming to rest on a mountain. He releases birds to find dry land. The tale bears striking similarities to the Hebrew Noah's Ark story, found in the book of Genesis, yet it predates it by more than 1,000 years. In both stories, divine wrath is central. The flood is not a natural disaster alone, but a moral reckoning, a cleansing of corruption. Similar narratives are found across the Indian subcontinent. In the Matsya Purana, one of the ancient Hindu scriptures, the god Vishnu takes the form of a fish and warns Manu, the first man, of an impending flood. Manu builds a great boat, which is tethered to the horn of Vishnu's fish form and is guided to safety through the raging waters. The parallels to the Mesopotamian and biblical stories are unmistakable, suggesting a common narrative structure, perhaps one rooted in real collective trauma, possibly linked to the end of the last ice age, when melting glaciers caused dramatic sea level rise and reshaped coastal ecosystems around the world. In China, ancient texts refer to the legendary flood of the Yellow River, said to have lasted generations. The mythic emperor Yu the Great became a cultural hero by taming these waters not through a singular act of divine intervention, but through engineering and wisdom. The story may reflect the periodic flooding of the river, which has long been both the lifeblood and the destroyer of Chinese civilization. In this version, the flood is not just a punishment or purge, but a civilizational trial, one that inspires technology, organization, and mythic leadership. Among Native American peoples, flood myths are equally rich and varied. The Hopi speak of a great flood that ended a previous world age, according to their tradition. Only those who followed the guidance of the benevolent Ant people, a race of underground dwellers, survived by sheltering beneath the earth. The Ojibwe, Cherokee, and many other nations also preserve legends in which a great deluge wipes out earlier corrupt or chaotic epochs, often accompanied by themes of renewal and rebirth. These stories may have been shaped by generational memory of glacial lake outbursts or rising waters that drowned land bridges during the Pleistocene-Holocene transition. In the Pacific Islands, where oral history and ocean navigation are deeply entwined, myths of sunken lands and drowning islands are particularly potent. The Polynesians tell of Hiva, a once great homeland lost beneath the scene, now remembered only in chants, stone ruins, and genealogical memory. In Micronesia and Melanesia, similar tales speak of gods or ancestors who warned their people of a great flood or punished hubris with rising seas. These tales carry emotional resonance for peoples who, even today, face rising ocean levels threatening their islands, making the line between ancient myth and modern reality more poignant than ever. In Australia, the Aboriginal peoples preserve perhaps the longest continuous cultural memories in the world, extending back more than 50,000 years. Among their Dreamtime stories are accounts of the sea-swallowing coastal lands, of rivers that changed course, and of ancestors forced inland as the waters rose. Some of these stories have been passed down for hundreds of generations, and when matched with modern sea level reconstructions, they align with real geological events from the end of the last ice age. This is perhaps the strongest evidence yet that some flood myths may encode actual historical memory, not in dates or measurements, but in symbolic truth, stories shaped to remember, not merely to entertain. Even the ancient Greeks, apart from Plato's Atlantis, told of a great flood, the myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who were spared by Zeus when he flooded the earth to destroy a wicked race of humans. They repopulated the world by casting stones behind them, which became men and women. The tale underscores a recurring motif found in flood myths everywhere, not just destruction, but regeneration. The flood is both an end and a beginning, a cosmic reset. So what are we to make of the universality of these myths? Some scholars argue they reflect common human anxieties about nature's power, about divine justice, about our place in a world we cannot fully control. Others point to them as cultural echoes of actual events: Ice Age floods, glacial dam bursts, tsunamis, rising oceans, or earthquakes that drowned cities in a single day. The truth may lie in both realms. Myths are not scientific records, but neither are they arbitrary fictions. They are memory shaped by meaning, emotionally charged, ritually preserved, and generationally resilient. And if we accept that some of these myths carry kernels of real memory, then they force us to consider a larger truth, that civilizations have always been vulnerable to the environment, that progress is not permanent, and that the forces which destroyed the old worlds could rise again, whether told in clay tablets, chanted on Pacific winds, or inscribed in temple stones. Flood myths remind us that the past is never as still as it seems, and that somewhere in the deep waters of our cultural memory, the stories of lost worlds still ripple. Few myths in human history have proven as magnetic, as enduring, or as elastic as that of Atlantis. Across more than 2 millennia, the story has been reinterpreted, romanticized, recontextualized, and repurposed by philosophers, explorers, spiritualists, nationalists, and conspiracy theorists alike. But to understand why Atlantis continues to hold such sway over the human imagination, one must peel back the layers of legend and look not just at the details of the myth itself, but at what the story represents. Atlantis is more than a tale of a lost city. It is an archetype, a symbolic template. It is a mirror that reflects our deepest hopes, greatest fears, and cautionary truths about civilization itself. When Plato first introduced Atlantis in his dialogues, Timaeus and Creatus, around 360 BCE, he described a magnificent island nation, beyond the pillars of Heracles' modern Gibraltar, rich in resources, technologically advanced, militarily powerful, and architecturally stunning. Atlantis was said to be ruled by a noble lineage of kings descended from the god Poseidon. The capital city featured concentric rings of land and sea, connected by bridges and canals, protected by walls clad in precious metals. It was a utopia, fertile, harmonious, and abundant. But this glory was not to last. The Atlanteans, Plato wrote, became corrupt, greedy, and prideful. They overreached, seeking to conquer other nations. And for this hubris, the gods punished them in a single day and night of misfortune. Atlantis was swallowed by the sea and disappeared forever. Plato insisted that the story came from Egyptian priests via the Greek sage Solon, lending it a veneer of historicity. But few classical scholars today believe that Plato intended it as literal history. Rather, it was a philosophical allegory, a way for Plato to critique the decline of Athenian virtue and contrast it with the ideal state described in his Republic. Atlantis was likely never meant to be a real place. It was a tool of moral instruction, a story about how greatness can lead to ruin when guided by arrogance instead of wisdom. And yet, almost immediately after its telling, the tale took on a life of its own. Later writers, such as Pliny the Elder and Proclus, debated the story's veracity. In the Renaissance, as European exploration expanded and new lands were discovered across oceans, the idea of Atlantis re-emerged with renewed vigor. Was it the Americas? Was it Antarctica? Was it buried under ice or sediment, waiting to be found? In the modern era, Atlantis became a canvas upon which countless theories were painted. It was Minoan Crete, destroyed by the Thera eruption. It was Doggerland in the North Sea. It was submerged in the Caribbean or hidden beneath the Sahara. But these quests, whether scientific or speculative, often miss the deeper point, that Atlantis is less about where and more about what. Atlantis is the story we tell ourselves about civilizational collapse. It embodies the recurring theme that no matter how advanced a society becomes, it is never immune to destructionist when it loses its moral compass. In this way, Atlantis echoes a broader mythic structure found in many cultures: the rise and fall of golden ages, the Hindu Yugas, the Greek ages of man. The Norse Ragnarok tell of a time when the world was purer, better, more just, only to be followed by decline and eventual ruin. Atlantis sits squarely in this tradition, a paradise lost through human failing. What makes the Atlantis archetype especially potent, however, is its duality. It is both a warning and a temptation. On one hand, it warns against the perils of hubris, imperial ambition, and disconnection from nature. On the other, it tantalizes with dreams of hidden knowledge, ancient wisdom, and lost technologies, ideas that have been co-opted by movements ranging from theosophy and esotericism to pseudo-archaeology and science fiction. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, Atlantis became entangled with racist ideologies that posited it as the origin of a superior Aryan racer. Distortion of Plato's myth that was later co-opted by the Nazi regime in their search for ancestral purity and mystical heritage. This dark chapter illustrates how myths can be twisted for ideological ends, and why separating metaphor from dogma is so crucial when dealing with powerful archetypes. In more benign contexts, the Atlantis myth has inspired visions of utopia, from Sir Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, a fictional island of scientific enlightenment, to Thomas More's Utopia, and onward to contemporary literature and media. Atlantis represents not just a civilization that once was, but one that might be or should be built again. This utopian longing reflects a deep yearning for harmony between human society and the natural world, for knowledge without corruption, for beauty without pride. In modern psychological terms, Atlantis can be seen as a projection of our collective unconscious. As the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung suggested, archetypes like the lost city or the great flood reside deep within the human psyche. They recur not because they are necessarily true in the historical sense, but because they are true. In the symbolic sense, they represent patterns of human behavior, fears of decay, and hopes for renewal. The story of Atlantis may not record a real place, but it records a real pattern, repeated again and again. Civilizations rising in brilliance, only to fall by their own hand. And this, ultimately, is why Atlantis persists not, because we believe we will find its marble temples beneath the ocean, but because we recognize its truth in ourselves. Every empire that has crumbled, Rome, Angkor, Cahokia, the Soviet Union, bears some echo of Atlantis. Every city that grows too fast, that pollutes its rivers, that builds monuments while its people starve, walks the same path. We see Atlantis not just in history, but in headlines. In the final analysis, Atlantis is the shadow of civilization, an ever-present reminder that the seeds of destruction are often sown in the soil of our greatest achievements. Yet even in its fall, it offers a kind of hope, that by remembering, by telling the story again and again, we might avoid repeating it.